Hey, everybody. Glad to be here with all of you tonight. We're going to have yet another great late night conversation. It is summertime in New York City. I'm really loving this weather. And here I am streaming on a Sunday. So let's do it. Let's do it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I am so glad that you are here tonight. We're having yet another late night conversation. And it's always good. It's always good. Now, the way we do these streams, for those of you who may not be familiar, is I give my opening remarks, which are then followed by the roll call, and then I answer your questions for the remainder of the night. So if there's something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the show, all you need to do is send me a Rumble rant, send questions via Rumble rant, or Cash App me at Caleb Maupin 22 on Cash App. Those are the two ways that questions can be sent. And it is really your questions that make the second half of the show what it is, the fun, exciting, awesome thing it is. Sometimes you guys ask really good questions that get me going. So please, make the second half of the show lively. Big announcement is Los Angeles. Yes, we are headed to Los Angeles. I am going to be in LA on Saturday doing an amazing workshop. Dan is organizing it with Ishmael, with everyone out there. And we are going to have a great workshop out in California. It's going to be pretty awesome. So if you are in Los Angeles or the area, or if you happen to be from somewhere else, we're just going to have a little meetup, one day meetup all day in LA. It's going to be really, really fun. Music, speeches, etc. So join us this weekend in Los Angeles. It's going to be a great Saturday all around. So I'm looking forward to our workshop. You can register at the link down below. And of course, what is occupying my mind 24/7 is the Chicago Convention. It will be the biggest event the Center for Political Innovation has ever done by leaps and bounds. And we are working hard to get some really important guests there. We are working really, really hard to really make it a dynamic event with some really, really important people and a lot of people there and a lot of really great stuff. So if there's one event that you come to this year, make it the Chicago Convention. We need all the help we can get. You can register for that down below. It's July 12th, 2025, 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. So I hope that you will take note of that. Now, as I said before, the way we do these streams is I give my opening remarks. Then from there, we do the roll call where I answer your question. I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. We find out who's watching. And then from there, I answer your questions for the remainder of the night. So if you have anything you would like me to talk about, send me a question via Rumble rant on the Rumble, or you can Cash App me at Caleb Maupin 22 on Cash App, and I will do my best to give you an answer to your question. I will try to give you an answer, and it's great to be here. So, opening remarks tonight, I just want to be a little bit chill. Why am I streaming on a Sunday? All right, generally I don't stream on Sunday. The reason that I don't stream on Sundays, just so you all know, is generally on Saturday. Saturday night I stream, and I stream pretty late. Often, I stream late into the night on Saturday. And then I get up in the morning for church, which, I go to church in Manhattan. And so, in order to get to Manhattan for the 10 o'clock service, I need to get up at 8, take a shower, brush my teeth, put on my suit and tie and all of that, then go to the subway, get on the subway by 9, and then get off the subway and be there for church to start at 10 a.m. And it generally, if I have streamed the night before and I am then going to attend church the next morning, I usually don't get much sleep because I am not the kind of person who goes to sleep very, very easily. My wife is the opposite of me. I joke that my wife, it's just, I could say to her, ready, set, sleep, and she would just go right to sleep. With me, going to sleep is kind of a long process, right? I have to settle down and all of that. So if I'm up at 1:30, 2:30, and then I have to be up and at 'em at 8 a.m. the next morning, it can be a little bit exhausted. And usually on Sundays by this time of day, I'm a little bit too tired to do a stream, right? I'm just not feeling up to it. And especially with allergies and with different stuff going on, I just generally don't stream on Sunday. However, today it worked. Last night, I finished the stream. We did, I think we did 3 hours last night, or it was close, right? We did a long stream last night. I went to sleep. I got up. I went to church. And now here I am streaming. And I got a great night's sleep last night. So I am feeling very, very good about it. I'm glad to be here with all of you. I don't have a slideshow for you all tonight. I am premiering the 2 slideshows that we just recently did. I'm premiering them on this channel. They will be premiering tomorrow and the next day. Because the slideshows are very popular. We did the history of communism in New York City on Friday. We did living as an innovationist last night on Sunday. Those are very popular. So they'll be streaming. They'll be premiering as standalone videos soon. I'm also preparing because I'm going to be traveling soon. In early June, it looks like I'll be traveling. And so I am preparing some long videos to premiere on this channel while I'm gone to, keep you all engaged. Some different content that we are preparing, different, cuts and clips of different things I've done. And the idea is to just have this channel be active and have videos highlighting past achievements, past great things that we have done on this channel while I'm gone. So I'm preparing that. So while I'm in California, I think on Saturday, there'll probably be a long video that premieres on this channel while I'm away. I think on, and while I'm away in early June, it'll be similar. I don't know how much I'll prepare, but I want to have stuff. The other thing about YouTube is it tends to not promote old content. Like, the things you've done in the past, they just kind of fade away. Everything is, that is so 5 minutes ago. So I like to highlight my older stuff by just having videos premiere. So we're going to do that as well. When I'm not streaming, have some long videos prepared that'll just premiere while I'm away. Those long form videos were a thing I was doing for a while on Sundays. That were quite popular. I would stream on Sundays, but I just have a really long video that just premiered all day long, highlighting the different stuff we've done over the years, different interviews, having some music. We just did it that way, and that was a fun thing to do. I'm certainly proud of having done that, and I think I'll do that while I'm traveling in early June. Obviously, my mind every day is on the convention. That is obsessing me. I am emailing people and calling people, and so. Yeah, do me a solid and come to the convention. I just found out there's one more person who's coming to the 7-day program, and that's great. And I mean, a lot of great things are happening. There's a real energy in the Center for Political Innovation right now, a really, really good energy. And I think the source of that energy is that we are refusing to get down in the mud, because there's a lot of mud being thrown right now in other circles that we used to be connected to, and we're just staying away from it. And that is an encouragement to me to stay away from it. And I keep getting, there keep being attempts to pull us into the mud, and we just keep saying no. We keep saying no, we're not going into the mud. No, thank you. And we just keep doing our thing. And that is keeping us on an optimistic and positive note. We are just not getting in to the mud. And so I would encourage you to do the same thing. And if you see some of the mud, don't try to drag us into it. Don't reply to it. There is no answer to this garbage out there. And honestly, most of the mud at this point doesn't involve us, right? Which is kind of convenient. It's kind of appreciated. Let other people be the lightning rods of mud, right? Because, the way it works is that there is this whole internet universe of people doing politics only on the internet that have no idea that they could ever do anything in real life. I mean, it just doesn't even occur to them that politics can be anything other than a podcast. Politics can be anything other than a really neat video that they film. Politics can be anything other than a lot of people watching their streams, and such people, they tend to attract both fans and anti-fans. And neither are productive, and they're connected with each other. And Peter Coffin is the brilliant pioneer of these, understanding the mindset of these circles and why they're toxic and why we need to break out of that. And he is really, Peter Coffin, I take my hat off to him. His latest work about the J.K. Rowling effect was absolutely tremendous. And he really understands how these kind of toxic internet pseudo-political circles operate. My feeling is that just don't engage. And the less we engage, the better. And the less we engage, the more we can reach ordinary people who would never go looking for this. And the less that we attract the kind of people who just get caught up in fandoms. Hey, there's a lot of people watching this who are great people. And they found this on the internet, and they become great people, and they become great organizers. However, there are a lot of people who find us on the internet and watch us for entertainment. Maybe they come to one live event or whatever, but they're really just watching this as internet entertainment. And then eventually they just change the channel and they start watching something else. And that really is not what we're looking for. We're looking for somebody who will get involved in the struggle, get involved in building the organization. And if this is a form of internet entertainment, eventually you develop another niche interest. Ultimately, this needs to be an organization, the Center for Political Innovation, that people join just because it's there, right? People don't join because they got interested in obscure politics and started looking. People don't join because they saw somebody on a podcast. No, they join because it's there, right? They encounter it in real life and see it doing real stuff and join it. That's what we need to become. That's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to build. But you can't fake it. You cannot fake it. And it's a lot of hard work, and it's a lot of work that shouldn't be filmed. I'll be honest. I like to film everything that we do because I want to set an example for other people. I want people to know that we exist. But honestly, real organizing often not only, is it not filmed, but it shouldn't be filmed. It's not because you're doing anything illegal, but, if people are being filmed, they often don't want to open up, and they don't feel comfortable if they're being filmed, right? People generally want to just be. And a lot of organizing is developing a connection with people that isn't a connection made for television, made for internet entertainment, but it's just a real connection based on real interactions where people can just open up without cameras in their faces. I go out on the street and I interview people, for my work. And one of the saddest things that I see is I meet people who often have very good opinions, but they won't say them on camera because they're afraid of getting canceled. It's really, really sad. And that, unfortunately in our day and age, a lot of people are really scared to talk about politics in public and all of that. And if you are walking around filming everything, you can't build a real organization, right? It's not that what we're doing is shady or illegal or, we're not proud of it. It's just that having cameras in everyone's face is kind of intimidating. Unfortunately, there are a lot of, this anti-fandom dynamic creates a lot of wreckers who just want to wreck everything you do because because they're jealous of you, because you're bad, because you're, and that's what's annoyed me the most, over the years is people that, they say something blatantly untrue about me. And I point out to them, hey, this is not true. And it just doesn't faze them at all. And then, well, you're bad because the internet said so. And it's like, you can't or be logical or reason with such people. I mean, they have no empathy. They have no touch with reality. They don't care what's true and what's not. They don't think you're a real person. They think you're the bad guy on their favorite internet show. Often, and I mean, I'm blown away by this, even though they hate you, right? Sometimes these people who are anti-fans, it's still awesome for them to meet you, which I think is fascinating, right? And every so often I meet an anti-fan. But when they meet me, they often are really nice because it's just like, oh, wow, I just saw my favorite TV character. So even though they hate me, they're not going to punch me or be hostile. They're just like, whoa. And then they tweet about, I met that evil bastard, Caleb. He smells even more evil when I met him, I don't know. It is what it is. It is what it is. And, I don't know. And so we just have to focus on building an in real life organization, not getting down in the mud. And we're doing a better job of that. And I appreciate that we're doing that. And yeah, I think that things going into July are going quite well. Looking forward to our LA workshop. It should be good. So if you're in LA, please hit us up, register, come to the event. If you are at all interested in anything that we're doing, come to the Chicago convention. It is going to be one hell of a shindig. I'll just tell you that much. It is certainly different than what we have done before, and it's certainly going to be bigger than what we have done before. So I really hope that you will make a point of engaging with us. Couple things I wanted to talk about. The Brooklyn crash. Now, last night I saw the video of the Brooklyn crash while we were on the air here. And I just saw it was like a sailboat, really. And it crashed into the Brooklyn Bridge, and the top of the sails, hit the Brooklyn Bridge. And I assumed incorrectly that it was not very serious. And shout out to Phil, who called me today. And then I was looking online. It was very serious. There have been multiple fatalities already. And if you actually watch the video, it's not simply a matter of the top of the masts hitting the bridge. There were sailors on the top of the mast, clinging for dear life and then falling to their deaths. I mean, it was awful. It was absolutely awful. And I mean, I am not an engineer, and I'm certainly not involved in maritime activities. I don't understand how that could have happened, right? I really don't. I don't understand how that event was able to take place. Did they not measure the top of the ship? Did they just not intend to go there? I don't know what happened, but it was pretty serious, right? It was a ship with a Mexican flag on it, full of people. And, last night it was in the Hudson River, and it went to the Brooklyn Bridge, and, excuse me. Or is that the East River? I don't think that's the Hudson River, right? That's the East River, right? Or I don't know. I'm a New Yorker, but I still don't know my bodies of water. I know the Atlantic Ocean. I know what the Atlantic Ocean is. I know Sheepshead Bay, and I know Rockaway Beach, but I don't know. I don't know my bodies of water, right? So there's the Hudson River and the East River. So I think maybe it was the East River. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend I know, but it crashed into the Brooklyn Bridge. And that was pretty serious. And, my heart goes out to the people who lost their lives, their family members. It's absolutely horrible. And seeing now the video, the different angles, I mean, wow, no, it's not just a matter of, the top, the masts clipping the bridge. It's awful. It was really bad. So yeah, wow. Yeah, I mean, I could reflect more, but there's really not much more to say. I am very, very excited for the Russian president and the American president speaking tomorrow on the phone. I am one of the few people who has been in the presence of both. Donald Trump called me his favorite reporter in 2016. And you've seen my interaction with Putin many times. Because my interaction with Donald Trump was a long time ago, maybe I should show that video. I wasn't thinking I would show that video, but what the heck? It's been a long time. My interaction with Trump was a really long time ago, and it's funny. I mean, it's hilarious, right? So I'm going to show the video, the 2-minute video of my interaction with Donald Trump. That, you know, it was in March of 2016 that I interacted with Trump. I put this video out on my birthday, that Christmas, right before Trump took office. So, yeah, I'll put this. This is the kind of the funny video I made about the time Donald Trump, the time that Donald Trump and that he interacted with me. This is the kind of humorous moment where I interacted with Trump. All right, so we'll put that on. We've got a few other things to talk about.
Hello friends, this is Caleb. I'm just here in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, and this is a message going out to all my friends on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and whatnot. Happy New Year, first of all. Now, I've been looking back over the events of 2016. It was quite an eventful year. Now, one event that certainly stands out in my mind is an interaction that I had with the man who was elected President of the United States, Donald Trump. Now, on March 21st, Donald Trump came to Washington, D.C., and he gave a press conference at the old post office, which is becoming a Trump hotel. At that press conference, I spoke to Donald Trump, and I asked him, is it, Donald Trump, you've said that you favor better relations with Russia. Is this a difficult position to take with the media in an anti-Russian overdrive? So I asked Trump that question, and this is how he responded. Are open for better relations with Russia as president?
Sure, I want a better relationship with everybody. A better with Russia, yeah. But I want a better relationship with everybody. Go ahead. No, I don't think so. I think the media understands. Look, if we can get along, Putin says very nice things about me. I think that's very nice. It has no effect on me other than I think it's very nice. If we get along with Russia, that's very good. If Russia wants to spend millions of dollars a day dropping bombs on ISIS, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. Some people don't like it. They say, no, that's our job. It's not our job. It's let Russia, if they want to do that, I'm all for it. No, I want to get along with all countries.
I was recently re-watching that clip, and one thing I noticed is that just before Donald Trump called on me and spoke to me, he said something that's rather interesting. This is what happened just before Donald Trump called on me.
Okay, one more question. One more. Who's got a good question? Who's got a good question? Who's my favorite reporter? Go ahead.
Someone could watch that clip and say, well, this is just a passing remark. He's just kind of talking as he's looking to call on anybody. He doesn't mean it. But I personally would like to give the President of the United States a little bit more credit than that. Is it possible that I'm actually Donald Trump's favorite reporter? Is it something about my reporting, my articles, my journalism that he really likes? I'd be curious to know. So if there's anyone here on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, who knows Donald Trump personally, perhaps they could ask him the question. Why is it that I am Donald Trump's favorite reporter? Did he mean what he said? I'm very curious. So Happy New Year to everyone. Hope you're all well, and be sure to follow me on social media, and be sure to tune in to RT.
Yep, those were the days. That was my interaction with Donald Trump. So I have interacted with the Russian president, and I've interacted with the American president. So the two of them are going to speak on the phone tomorrow. There are direct negotiations happening between Russia and Ukraine. Russia wants to address the root causes of the conflict. Let's hope for the best. And the same for Iran. There are nuke talks. Direct nuclear talks between the United States and Iran are scheduled to happen pretty soon. And I can only hope for the best. I have never tried to tell people that Donald Trump is a good dude. He's, right where we're at politically, etc. All I've ever said is that with Donald Trump, we have more of a chance of world peace than we would have had with Kamala Harris, than with the Democrats. And I think that, as bad as things have been, there have certainly been plenty of things that have happened in the last 5 months that I'm not thrilled about. Honestly, there are a number of things that would not have happened if Trump wasn't president. First thing, 30-day ceasefire for the first 30 days of Trump's presidency. Biden was president for 2 years after October 7th. Not once was there a single ceasefire. And as soon as Trump got in, ceasefire. TikTok was about to be banned. And they said there was nothing Donald Trump could do about it. And just hours before Donald Trump took office, TikTok. Now, the latest thing is the USA withdrew from the Red Sea. You know, Trump bombed Yemen, which he shouldn't have done. Horrible. Biden also bombed Yemen, which he shouldn't have done. And the USA, via Saudi Arabia, had been bombing Yemen since 2015. Awful. But Donald Trump withdrew the USS Truman from the Red Sea. And he said, oh, I got him. The Houthis agreed to never attack an American ship. Well, that wasn't the issue. The Houthis were saying they were going to keep blocking ships and keep attacking ships until Israel stopped bombing Gaza. And they stopped their blockade during the 30-day ceasefire. When Israel broke that ceasefire, they resumed it. And so Donald Trump started bombing Gaza. And then the Houthis hit the USS Truman, the U.S. Aircraft carrier. And it seems like there were pretty clearly some casualties on the U.S. side. U.S. media is trying to say that is not the case, but it pretty clearly is. And then Donald Trump just announced, you know what, we're pulling out. And he said, we're pulling out. And he said, oh, yeah, I showed him they'll never attack U.S. ship again. Well, that wasn't the issue. And then Donald Trump was even asked, what if the Houthis continue to attack Israel? And he said, quote, I'll be fine with that. Now, that's huge. He threw Netanyahu under the bus and he withdrew the U.S. military from the Red Sea. That is absolutely amazing. And I can guarantee you that would never have happened if Kamala Harris had been president. Kamala Harris, who was really running things under Biden, was happy to bomb Yemen. And she and Biden, they could never get Israel to have a single ceasefire. Donald Trump got a ceasefire. Ceasefire was broken. Then Yemen continued to do their thing. And then Trump sent the soldiers in. And then he's like, you know what? Fine. And they pulled out. And Trump sold it as a win. Oh, we devastated the Houthis. No, you didn't. Donald Trump said the Houthis called America and, they apologized for attacking ships. They said, we'll never attack your ship again. Well, now the Houthis and the Iranians have said, actually, no, that's not what happened. The USA called the Houthis, and the USA said to the Houthis, if we pull our ship out, can you just stop attacking American ships? And the USA agreed. So it was the USA got driven out of the Red Sea. That's what happened. And the Houthis still run the Red Sea, and they're still fighting Israel. And you'll notice, again, now another thing that would not have happened if Kamala Harris was president. Another big thing that just happened is Donald Trump went to the Middle East and he snubbed Israel. He did not visit Israel. He went to Saudi Arabia. And while he was there, he gave a speech that had a dig he said that the Middle East was not built by nation builders, neocons, or liberal nonprofits. That's the quote from the speech. And he basically took a swing at Israel when speaking to Saudi Arabia. That's pretty big as well. And there is direct U.S.-Iran negotiations, which Biden said he was going to do. He was going to resume, getting Iran back into the nuclear deal, but he never did. So, Trump, he murdered Qasem Soleimani in his first term, which is unforgivable and horrible. He needs to apologize for that, which Donald Trump is not an apologizing kind of guy. So I don't know if that'll happen ever, but it really needs to. But that said, so far in this term, he's been better on the Middle East than Biden was, right? Biden was unable to restrain Israel. Biden was unable to stick it to Israel, and Trump is. And he threw them under the bus regarding Yemen. He just dissed them in Saudi Arabia. He went to the Middle East and didn't meet with them. Trump is navigating. He's juggling, and sometimes what he's doing with the students is absolutely awful. Deporting students for their political views, absolutely horrendous. That's certainly not good. There's plenty that you can be critical of the Trump administration for, but compared to the alternative, this is one of those rare instances in American politics where you do see a difference between the major parties and the major candidates, and Trump is slightly better. And let's keep in mind, they tried to outlaw boycotting Israel. They wanted to make it a crime where you would go to jail for 20 years for boycotting Israel. And who killed that bill? MAGA Republicans. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massey and others, they said, no, you can boycott whoever you want. And Marjorie Taylor Greene was amazing. She came out swinging against U.S. involvement in Yemen. She said, I've never met a Houthi, right? There's nothing for America in fighting the Houthi. That was utterly amazing, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene was the voice of the anti-war movement when it came to Yemen. So there are good things happening in the MAGA camp. Look, I'll just tell you how it is. I'm not for the Democrats or the Republicans. I'm not for the mainstream of U.S. politics. I'm against this imperialist system. That said, right, the way that things are set up generally in U.S. politics is you have the mainstream party and you have the dissident circles, the opposition. And back in my day, youngins, it was the Republicans that were the mainstream party. And that was true, actually. Back in my day, in the Bush years, it was the Republicans that were the mainstream party. And there was no dissent in the Republican Party. People like Pat Buchanan, people like the John Birch Society, people like the far right, you just didn't know they existed. The Republicans lined up behind Bush. Are you for Bush or are you for the terrorists? If you criticize Bush, why do you hate our country? Why do you hate the troops? And they marched in lockstep behind U.S. foreign policy, behind the establishment, behind the attacks on our civil liberties. And it was in the Democrat camp, even though the Democrats pretty much went along with what Bush did, it was in the Democrat camp that you had Dennis Kucinich, who was my congressman when I was in Ohio, when I was in college. Brilliant man, amazing man, who's now a Trump supporter. You had Cynthia McKinney, brilliant woman who's been on this YouTube channel before for interviews. I've been at international conferences with her. Amazing woman, friend of Gaddafi, amazing. Cynthia McKinney, who was a Democrat in those days. And, in the Democrat side, you had people that were actually opposing what things were done because the Democrats were like the opposition party. Now, the Democratic Party itself was pretty much going in the same direction, but there was room for dissent. Now, it seems the room for dissent is in the Republican camp. That's just a fact. That doesn't mean the Republican Party isn't a party of U.S. imperialism. It clearly is. That doesn't mean the bulk of Republicans aren't lining up behind Israel, behind U.S. wars. They clearly are. It means, though, that there is room for dissent in the Republican Party in a way that there is not room for dissent in the Democrat Party. And basically all the Democrats who were dissidents have been pushed out. Dennis Kucinich is now a Trump supporter. Tulsi Gabbard is in Trump. She's Trump's director of national intelligence. That any of the Democrats who at this point, who were dissidents, RFK or whatever, they're on Team Trump or they're just not in politics anymore. Whereas the Democrat Party has turned into the party of politically correct imperialism. And what it really is that the demographics have changed. During the 1970s, right, you had a song, I'm proud to be an Okie from Muskogee, right? It was you had the protesters opposing the Vietnam War. You had the black community that was rebelling against racism and such. But most of America, middle America, small town America, people in the South, people in the Midwest, they didn't want to hear it, right? They thought those hippies were all a bunch of spoiled kids, who needed a haircut, and they thought the black community should just stop whining and complaining. That was average Americans were conservatives, right? Who said, love it or leave it, whatever. And the way the Republicans were able to kind of come out of the 60s and early 70s political crisis was, Richard Nixon did his silent majority thing. And after Richard Nixon, you had the rise of, Nixon was basically forced out because he was too powerful. And he was a bit of a right-wing populist in his own way. But Nixon was forced out. And when Nixon was forced out, Nixon's vice president, not his original vice president, Spiro Agnew, but his second vice president, Gerald Ford, became the only president that no one voted for. No one voted for him as vice. No one voted for him as president. And he became the only president no one ever voted for, Gerald Ford. And when Gerald Ford came in, it was like a coup. And Gerald Ford brought in Dick Cheney, brought in Donald Rumsfeld, and he brought and he made Milton Friedman, a government employee, as an economist, brought Ayn Rand into the Oval Office. And the neoconservatives, the neocons, took control of the Republican Party. And the Republican Party very much pandered hard to middle America. White picket fence, American flag waving, Bible reading, middle America. that supported the military and supported the wars. And there was a rise of evangelical Christianity. And it was kind of like, if you were against what the American government was doing, you must be a crazy hippie or a crazy black radical, and we don't have any room for that. And that was the late Cold War normal, with the Republican Party, the neocon Republican Party, being the extreme party of the establishment, and the Democrats being the opposition party. Now, there were some things that were very, very weird. For example, Leo Strauss, who was the intellectual, who's kind of the godfather of the neocons. He wrote Persecution and the Art of Writing, just one of these philosophical irrationalists, a Nietzscheist, basically. Contempt for the masses, etc. Persecution in the Art of Writing, Neoplatonist or whatever. Leo Strauss, he had always said that his favorite television show was Gunsmoke, because the good guy wears a white hat and he's all good, and the bad guy wears a black hat and he's all bad. And that's how average Americans should understand foreign policy, because they're too stupid, right? And that leave it to the great intellectuals to navigate the nuances of the world. But for average Americans, politics should be an episode of Gunsmoke. Well, that is Leo Strauss. And what's interesting is that when the neocons, who were all his students, took control of the Republican Party, we had two cowboy presidents, one of whom was a literal cowboy actor from Hollywood. Ronald Reagan was literally a cowboy actor. And after that, we had George W. Bush, who was actually born in Connecticut, and his father's New England old money, but yet George W. Bush reinvented himself to be a cowboy, and he put on a cowboy hat, and they did TV interviews of him, clearing brush on his ranch, and they did a whole thing of George W. Bush became a cowboy. And so we literally had two cowboy presidents after Leo Strauss laid out that was the neocon political strategy. What was changing was the demographics of the United States. The USA was simply becoming less and less of a white country. And it was white people, white middle-class people, that laid the basis for neocon politics. And so, as the country became less and less white, and that white middle class got poorer and less pro-establishment, that was also part of it, right? And the neocons, the way that they were able to kind of change political discourse, kind of their trademark was that Democrats generally had more support on economic issues, right? Polls show that while Americans may be divided on, Americans are divided on a lot of issues. When it comes to how much should teachers get paid a decent amount, when it comes to should there be food stamps, these kinds of issues, there tends to be a slight left lean. The American public tends to favor, a welfare state to some degree. They don't favor privatization. So what the neocons did is they said, let's make it about race, right? And that was very brilliant on their part, very evil. But, if you make economic issues about race, white middle-class people will oppose it, right? And this is something many people have pointed out about the American welfare state, right? For example, if you hear the term welfare mother, right, what comes to your mind immediately? Even though the majority of women with children who receive government assistance are white, what comes to your mind when you hear welfare mother is a very overweight African-American woman. And that's media propaganda. And that's why a lot of white people were in favor of cutting food stamps, because they thought, oh, these black people, they don't need it. And they had racial stereotypes in their mind. They're racist, right? Even though the majority of mothers with children who get food stamps or get assistance are white, but that doesn't matter. They made it about race. And that was that, the neocons, that was their thing, is if you make issues that are economic issues about race, you can get white people to take right-wing stances. But that was changing because the white middle class was losing out. I mean, their incomes were decreasing. They were all getting their homes foreclosed. The white middle class was getting poorer, and the population, was getting less and less, less and less prosperous and less white. And so Barack Obama's presidency kind of marked the shift of the establishment transitioning from neocon messaging to woke messaging. And it's the same establishment with the same regime change goals. with the same economic policies of degrowth and impoverishment. But now, instead of having an American flag and a cross, they have a rainbow flag and a Black Lives Matter logo while they do it. But it's the same. It's the same entities: the American Enterprise Institute, Boeing. I mean, it's like the same corporations, the same entities. It's the same thing, really. So, that's worth pointing out. Another thing. So, the big news that broke today was about Biden's cancer, right? That Biden has cancer that has spread to his bones, and that there's been some more revelations. People have come forward about how much Biden was not really the president, how other people were running the country, how he wasn't all there. We all knew that. And the sad thing is, though, to some degree or other, I mean, what president is really running the country? I mean, Trump seems to be running the country more than any president we've had in a while, right? But it's because he's got people around him like Tulsi Gabbard, like Kash Patel, like RFK, who can nudge him in a certain way. And there's also a lot of people around Trump that are nudging him in a bad way. And Trump seems to be running the country more than any previous president in recent history. But for the most part, even though most of the presidents we've had were not completely brain dead throughout their presidency, like Biden was, at the same time, they're not running the country. There's always these unelected people who've written books that are quite scary that end up sitting next to the president. Samantha Power, Samantha Power, I've written a lot about, and she was whispering in the ear of Barack Obama with her husband, Cass Sunstein. And those two people are two very, very, very evil people. And no one got to vote for them. Samantha Power could never be president. She was born in Ireland. Cass Sunstein, no one would ever vote for him because he's just an unappealing person. He's just not very fun to be around. But both of them were, bumbling around the White House. And a lot of Americans didn't even know their names. Ben Rhodes, it turns out, was the guy who ran much of Obama's foreign policy. Have you ever heard of Ben Rhodes? He's like a novelist, and he's from the family that owned NBC or something like that. And this guy, Ben Rhodes, was apparently running a lot of Obama's foreign policy. It was like going to hotels to meet with Raul Castro, and was, negotiating the Iran deal and Libya and all kinds of stuff. And Ben Rhodes, Samantha Power, and Cass Sunstein, no one ever got to vote for them, but they probably had a lot more to do with what actually happened than Barack himself. Barack didn't really know that much, but he was surrounded by people who were pointing him in certain directions. And those people were not so good. Samantha Power, and I just published, I wrote a lot of articles about her when she was the UN representative. I've stood like 4 feet away from her. I was a UN reporter for years. And so I have been in her presence. I've smelled the sulfur. I know her quite well, I guess you could say. I mean, I don't know her, but I've been in her presence. Samantha Power. This is my new book that I published of all my articles about Samantha Power and all that stuff. And, Samantha Power, born in Ireland and had an America fetish since she was a child. Talked about how she would always practice her American accent in the mirror because she didn't want to live in Ireland. She wanted to get rid of her brogue and move to America since the time she was a child. Her father was a drunk, an alcoholic who beat up her mother. Her mother left her father and moved to America. Her father died of alcohol poisoning. And she moved to America, and she just wanted to be American so much. She just loved America so much that she decided to become a baseball team manager, because that's what's more American than that, baseball, right? And she worked for a baseball team. But then, she heard about, she saw the atrocity propaganda about Yugoslavia. And for some reason, I do not know why, this baseball team woman, who's involved in baseball and worked for a baseball team, decided to start writing propaganda about Serbia, right? And about the Balkans. And she got heavily involved in the Balkans and the stuff going on in the Balkans. And, and she wrote about Serbian people being murderous monsters and genocide and Slobodan Milosevic. And she actually wrote in her book, Problem from Hell, about, genocide or whatever, that she feels it is the duty of the media to build the case for war. And she said that the people in the Pentagon and, the State Department needed the support of journalists to build the case for the U.S. military intervention in Yugoslavia. She is a warmonger, literally, not in that she likes war. A fishmonger is not a guy who likes fish. He's a guy who sells fish, right? A monger is one who sells. A fishmonger sells fish. Samantha Power sells war. She was a war seller. And based on what? Based on the fact that she ran a baseball team and she grew up in Ireland and had a drunk dad? I don't know what gave her the qualifications, but she became a warmonger, and she became a professional warmonger. And that led her to work in Obama's White House. And eventually she became the UN ambassador under Obama. And, she is one of the main architects of the U.S. military intervention in Libya. Awful. Her husband is Cass Sunstein. And Cass Sunstein is a piece of work. Cass Sunstein is involved in public relations and foreign policies, one of these intellectuals. And he wrote a book while he was under the Obama administration. He wrote a book about conspiracy theories, but there was a classified version of it, like a classified paper about the danger of conspiracy theories that he wrote that was leaked. But before we get to the classified version, let's just talk about his book. His book is some kind of weird psychological operation, because it's all about, what are conspiracy theories? Why do people believe in conspiracy theories? All these kinds of things, right? And it talks about how in the Middle East, people believe in conspiracy theories, and that makes them not like America and makes them support terrorist groups, and conspiracy theories are no good, and, whatever. And he talks about conspiracy theory. People are often very educated. They know a lot. Oh, well, there you go. They know a lot. Can't have that. And, and what it's like to argue with people who believe in conspiracy theories and all of this, and then he says that, the main reason people believe in conspiracy theories is because they are conforming, because all the people around them believe in conspiracy theories. And that's the big conclusion that he draws in the book. And I, as somebody who's lived in the United States of America, I know for a fact that is not true. Generally, people did not become 9/11 truthers because they wanted to fit in. Generally, people didn't get into the JFK thing because everybody else was. It was the cool thing to do, man. That's just not accurate. It might be accurate globally, right? That if you live in a country where the government promotes, critical thoughts of the United States, globally that might be true. But domestically in the United States, it's absolutely not true. But then I realized, why is he saying that? Because he's trying to do some kind of weird mind flip. Right? People who believe in conspiracy theories often have resentment against the sheep, right? Against, the average people who won't wake up or whatever, right? The mob, the people that go along with it. That's why many conspiracy theorists are libertarians. It's because there's an element of elitism and anger at average people who won't just wake up. So Cass Sunstein is trying to do some weird reverse psychology on his audience and say, well, if you really want to non-conform and be smart, you should stop believing conspiracy theories. It's some kind of weird trick, but it actually follows what NPR and a lot of the liberal outlets have done. They have really tried to make their anti-conspiracy, pro-establishment stuff seem non-conforming and smart and sexy. Right. That is really what Cass Sunstein's method that he used at the end of his book, where, if you really, it's believing in a conspiracy theory makes you a conformist. Right. That seems to be how the kind of deprogramming materials have been reinvented. Right. As these Brooklyn hipsters think they're so smart because, I would never listen to Alex Jones. He's racist. I read all about it. I know about Umberto Eco, you fool. And it's like there's been a kind of a reversal of how anti-conspiracy propaganda works. It used to be conspiracy theories were dismissed as with accusations of being unpatriotic, accusations of being crazy. Now conspiracy theories are dismissed with, oh, you must be a stupid person who believes what you read on the internet. Well, I'm an educated person. I read the New York Times that told me that's Putin propaganda. That's what the Russians would want you to believe. I'm smart and non-conforming. That's why I believe what the government tells me to believe, you sir. You know, they want to make people feel smart in non-thinking, right? It used to be that the defense of the establishment was that. But then there was the classified version of his conspiracy theory paper that was leaked. This is the husband of Samantha Power, where he said that in order to defeat conspiracy theories, it would be necessary for the government to create fake conspiracy theories to confuse everyone and discredit conspiracy theories. That was crazy. And he also said they may want to outlaw conspiracy theories, which they are starting to do, right? We saw that during the COVID pandemic. I mean, they didn't literally outlaw them, but they took down people's Facebooks for saying true things that were factually accurate. You know, if you said that, things about the vaccine that are now 100% confirmed to be true, they would shut your Facebook down. They would ban you from social media, and that, people had their whole careers and everything destroyed, for saying things that are true. Now it's not full on outlawed, but then we saw with Alex Jones, right? So Alex Jones was sued because he promoted conspiracy theories about the Sandy Hook killing, that they said led people to harass the surviving parents of the murder. And, on that basis, Alex Jones was sued for an insane amount of money. Now it's not outlawing it, but it's lawfare, right? And this is similar, the Charlottesville thing. Obviously, our heart goes out to Heather Heyer and her family. We obviously, think it was very tragic and awful what happened there. We obviously we're not huge fans of the Confederacy here. We're not defending Confederate monuments. But regardless, the people that organized that rally, they thought that they were going to do what far right people generally do, is they have their rallies surrounded by 1 million police. They chant their racist slogans, they wear their silly costumes, and they go home. But they specifically did not provide police protection. They specifically created an atmosphere where the protesters and Antifa and the far right, people were right up next to each other. And that was a recipe for disaster. And it's surprising there wasn't more violence and more people killed. I mean, there was one person killed. But then they sued all the organizers of the rally. And they sued them for millions of dollars and held them responsible for the death of the woman who was killed by the guy, driving his car. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not going to defend Confederate monuments, and I'm certainly not going to defend, we're not arguing about this politically, but the idea that you hold a protest, that protest happens, the police protection you expected is not there. There's a bunch of fist fighting. In that fist fighting, somebody gets hurt, and then they sue you for organizing the rally, right? That is legal precedents that are being set, and they're trying to make certain speech illegal, right? That, and it's like, the Sandy Hook families got their feelings hurt by people who heard what Alex Jones had to say. The Charlottesville, the Unite the Right people organized a protest that people then went to expecting they would have more police protection. There wasn't. People got hurt. Someone got killed. And so then it became their fault for organizing the rally, and they are all sued for millions of dollars. This is all very, very dangerous. And then obviously we saw what happened with the Uhuru movement, that for their speech about the Ukraine war, they were dragged into federal court for being foreign agents of Russia. We've covered that extensively on this channel. They raided the home and the house of the Uhuru movement, raided their homes, dragged them to jail, charged them with being foreign agents, simply for articles they published about the Ukraine war. And they spent a long time in federal court, and they've even got a conspiracy conviction that they expect to be overturned. They didn't get any jail time. They didn't get any fines. And they were found not guilty on the charge of acting as foreign agents. However, they were found guilty of conspiracy, and they're still having to deal with that. These are all very, very dangerous things. And I mean, Cass Sunstein seems to have engineered some of this, right? If you can't just discredit conspiracy theories by filling the web up with conspiracy theories of your own, what you can do is you can outlaw them, and that's Cass Sunstein, and then Ben Rhodes. Is Ben Rhodes. So between Ben Rhodes, Cass Sunstein, Samantha Power, we never got to vote for any of those people. But they are the ones that were pretty much running the White House under Obama. And the big moment in Obama's presidency, the big moment was, first of all, Barack Obama was asked what was the best and worst moment of his presidency. And on multiple occasions, he said the best moment of his presidency was in 2013 when they avoided bombing Syria. When they got Syria to hand over their chemical weapons, and in response to the alleged chemical attack, they didn't bomb Syria. Well, that was a moment where Hillary Clinton and all Samantha Power and all of them were urging Obama to bomb Syria, and he didn't. Whereas he says the worst thing he did as president was go into Libya without a clear plan. So he's not saying it was wrong to overthrow the Libyan government, not wrong to brutally murder Gaddafi, not wrong to destroy the most prosperous country in Africa, but he said they did it without a clear plan. But if you look at the details, Barack Obama really did not want to militarily intervene in Libya, but they put pressure on him. And according to the biography, the memoir of Ben Rhodes and others, they told Barack Obama that when Gaddafi said he was going to go house to house, that meant he was going to kill everyone in Benghazi. And that wasn't true. He wasn't actually going to kill everyone in Benghazi. They were just going to find the terrorists. But because Gaddafi used the words house to house, they said to Barack Obama, Gaddafi is going to commit genocide. He's going to murder every person in Benghazi, and you will have been the guy who let it happen. And you'll notice that when Barack Obama first bombed Libya, he gave a press conference. He said, look, we prevented genocide. We say we prevented genocide. Well, no, you didn't. You didn't prevent genocide. That was just a lie. But that's what he was told. He was told that by the people around him. And so, Barack Obama was not, a vegetable as Biden apparently was, but he really, how much of a decision was he making? All of this is very, very interesting. So it's important to keep all of that in light. I did want to just touch on one other topic, and then I'm going to read to you from my new book on Khrushchevism. If you do have any questions you would like me to answer, I am taking questions for the second half of the show. They can be sent via Rumble Rants, or they can be sent to Caleb Maupin 22 on Cash App. Those are the two ways we are accepting questions. We are accepting questions. Second half of the show is all you guys, so send me a good one. Send me a good one. Send me a good one. But one other topic I wanted to touch on before I start reading to you all. So this is something that I recently was discovering. CPI, we published this book about the Houthis, and we've published 1,000 copies of our book on the Houthis that we are distributing as we build for the convention coming up. Right, this is our book. Who are the Houthis? What are they fighting for? And we're distributing them. We have an edition with the poster for the convention on the back of it. And we're visiting different mosques, and there's a lot of Islam is just like any other major faith. There are different factions and groups, right? And we've talked on these streams before about how Muslims generally can be divided into three groups. You have Wahhabi, they're Sunnis and Shias, but among Sunnis you have Wahhabi, traditional, deeply conservative Sunnis, and you have westernized Sunnis. That tends to be the Muslim Brotherhood, right? And then you have Shia, and the Shia tradition, at this point is most heavily influenced by the Islamic Revolution of Iran because they're a Shia government. They're a government in an oil-rich state that practices Shia Islam, though not all Shia love Iran. It's kind of a sliding scale. Some Shia really love Iran and really look up to the supreme leader of Iran, and other Shia say, well, we have the same religion. It just depends, right? There's kind of a sliding scale, but when it comes to Muslims, you tend to have westernized Sunnis from the tradition of the Muslim Brotherhood. You have Wahhabis that are deeply conservative Sunnis. I saw some of them on the train actually coming home from church today. I took the train in Manhattan, and there were three women in niqab on the subway. And they were just standing there, and niqab or burqa, it's they only got the eyes. And I mean, that's illegal in Iran. And in Iran, you have a lot of women who it's only their face, but it is actually illegal to do the only the eyes thing. But there were like 3 women on the subway in New York City that were, completely, and they were wearing black gloves, so you couldn't even see their hands. And it's a hot day to be wearing gloves. That's Wahhabism, right? That's the Saudi Wahhabi traditional, deeply conservative Sunni thing. And then you have westernized Islam, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, that they say the West is more Islamic. They love the free market. They love Western technology. And then you have the Shia current, which is anti-imperialist. It's all about fighting for the oppressed. It honors the imams who were martyred fighting for the poor and fighting against the merchants and the corrupt ummads, etc. So, you have that. Generally, a lot of Sunnis, both Wahhabi Sunnis and westernized Sunnis, say that Shia Islam is politics, not religion. Isn't that interesting? That is generally what is said about Shia, right? Is that Shia, this is a political movement. It's not about the Quran. It's not about God. It's just a political movement. It's a political movement started, the imams, they wanted to rule. And so they built a political movement. And they will acknowledge, by the way, a lot of Sunnis do acknowledge that the imams were right, that the ummads were corrupt, and that the imams were more righteous. They say Imam Ali was a good man, Imam Hussein was a good man, but they don't recognize them as representatives of God on earth, as successors to the prophet. And they argue that Shia Islam is simply a political movement rather than religion. That is generally the critique of Shia Islam that is given. Because in Iran, you have the Islamic Republic of Iran that began with a mass revolution that toppled a dictator and created the Islamic Republic. Because you have movements like Hezbollah in Lebanon, like the Houthis in Yemen. They say, well, Shia Islam, that's not real Islam. That's a political movement. And that's interesting to me. I don't agree with that, obviously. I've been to Iran and I've met Shia. They are very religious people, very, very religious people. But that reminds me of what is generally said about liberation theology in America. Right. And I was thinking about this today as I was coming home and I saw those Wahhabi women on the subway, in the full, niqab, burqa, and I was thinking about that. And I was thinking about how, I've talked to various Sunnis who are against Shia, and they say, well, Shia is a political movement. It's not religion. And I actually remembered when I first came to New York City. Right. I've been in this city for 15 years. When I first came to New York City in 2010, Barack Obama was in his first term in office, and there had been a whole big thing about how Barack Obama had a pastor named Reverend Jeremiah Wright. And I would just, I had a laptop, that had Wi-Fi, and I would just hang out in McDonald's. Right. I didn't have very much money, but I could order a Coke and fries, and I would hang out at McDonald's and work on my laptop. So I was sitting in Manhattan at this McDonald's in Manhattan on like 14th Street. And it's got like 3 floors, right? It's like a 3-floor McDonald's in Manhattan. And I'm sitting there working on my laptop. And there was a pastor meeting with one of his congregants. It was like a teenage young man he was meeting with, and he had the Bible, and he was talking to this young teenage man, and he was explaining to him Jesus and his critique of the Pharisees. And he was saying, well, those Pharisees, they were just like Jeremiah Wright. They were building a political movement. They weren't following what God actually said, right? And I just sat there, right? This was the time in my life when I would argue with people, but I figured they're having like a Bible study session there. I'm not going to walk over. And I was not religious. I was an atheist at the time, so I figured it's not my place. But I thought, that's so wrong. That is not correct. Even then, I knew that that was not correct. The Pharisees were not building a political movement. The Pharisees were all about the letter of the law. They were all about, we are following the letter of the law. And Jesus, on the other hand, was saying it's more about right and wrong than about the letter of the law. And I remember sitting there and thinking, how were the Pharisees like Jeremiah Wright? But this was the talking point, that liberation theology, or like left-wing Christianity, which was apparently an influence on Barack Obama, was just politics, not religion, right? That the liberation theology movement in Latin America, Reverend Jeremiah Wright, and there was a big push for queer and feminist theology and stuff like that. And the claim was that this is not politics, this is not religion, this is just politics. And what's interesting is Jeremiah Wright, that the Pharisee argument between Jesus and the Pharisees was about legalism versus right and wrong. But at the same time, I would say that what that guy was saying, right, that leftist Christianity is just a political movement, it's not really religious. Unfortunately, over the next few years, especially following wokeification, that did turn into reality. I remember when the People's Forum, which now I can't even go to in New York City. I mean, I wouldn't, they'd run me out of there on a rail. But when it first opened, the People's Forum opened, this building, this like leftist building in Manhattan on 38th Street. When they first opened, I went to a couple events there. They had an event about Venezuela there, and I went to it. And they had these ministers speak, and these ministers were horrible. They were just phoning it in, right? They were college-aged guys, and they were awful speakers, and they didn't understand the politics, and they didn't have a coherent religious message, and they were just there to be the black preacher that was part of building a leftist movement. And it was very cringe. And especially after Trump won the election, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, they would all start running articles, the rise of the religious left. And I live in Brooklyn, and I went and sat in those pews, and that was a bunch of crap. I'll just tell you that much. It was all fake. It was all fake. They do a big story. Oh, there's a church in Brooklyn that is opening that has a transgender Puerto Rican minister. And you would go there, and it was bullshit. It was fake. It all was fake. It had just a fake, it was all contrived. It wasn't something that anyone wanted to do. It was something that somebody rich and powerful with a lot of money decided needed to happen. And it was done in a very contrived way. Had a lot of money behind it, no question. There was a lot of money behind that. But in terms of people that were actually interested and actual religious passion from the people that were doing the sermons and the preaching, there was almost none of it. It was all very contrived. It is, we are now opening a liberal church. We are now opening a liberal synagogue. We are pro-LGBT. We are pro-Black Lives Matter. We are, inclusive of all different types of, but it was like, I am up here checking off the boxes. I am up here reading off a list of liberal political statements. There was no passion. There was no passion whatsoever. It was all very, very robotic, and it was all widely publicized, and it was all fake. It was all completely fake. Now, it was different, I know, in the 1960s, and it was different with liberation theology in the 80s, and all that stuff was very, very different, right? And there's a whole tradition with, there's Pastors for Peace that does work for Cuba, and that it's different. It's different. But at the same time, there was this big effort of we're going to have a religious left now. And it was a bunch of malarkey. And it was a political movement posing as religion. Much more so than the religious right is. And many people have pointed out that a lot of what the religious right does, when you really get down to it, if you go to a deeply conservative, fundamentalist church, they don't talk about politics that much. They say gay marriage is wrong. They say abortion is wrong. They say the Bible is literally true. But they're mainly just talking about religious stuff, and the politics is just kind of assumed. It's there in the background, but it's not the focus. Whereas, I hate to break it to you, these liberal churches, it tends to all be about, they're checking off the boxes, and we oppose Donald Trump doing this, and we witness for justice for this oppressed minority. And it was all very contrived. and it flopped. I mean, you know, some of the mainline churches that exist have gotten more political. Okay. So in that sense, maybe it's caught on, right? I've seen that, you know, like Unitarian churches have always been pretty liberal, but they're more liberal than they used to be. And they're more vocally political. The United Church of Christ that I grew up in my town, it was quite conservative because I was in a conservative area, but on a national level, it's quite liberal. And now, you know, they are much more vocal than they used to be. I mean, they were always quite vocal, but they're even more vocal than they used to be. You know, and so I guess kind of existing liberal churches that have always been liberal have become more vocal in their politics and more explicitly political. But other than that, the whole religious left thing completely flopped. And why? Why? Because I think that a real passionate, you know, what you might call a religious left. I mean, left and right don't really mean anything anymore, but a real religious movement of the oppressed is something that the establishment of this country is really terrified of. Very, very terrified of. And such things do exist in the world. The Shia Islamic movement, right? The Houthis, that is a deeply religious, fanatical movement of the oppressed. And something like that is what the U.S. government is absolutely terrified of. Read about it. Also, we got in our history, there's a guy named John Brown, right? Look at John Brown, right? That's an actual religious movement of the oppressed. And that's something the American government would be very, very terrified of. You know, and there have been, you got Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., for example. I mean, you have religious movements in the United States that do take on a revolutionary character. And those movements are something the establishment is very, very afraid of, right? You're allowed to be passionate and genuine about religion if you express it in a way that is not at odds with the power structure. But if you are, you know, at least dog whistling or giving space to notions of fighting injustice or whatever, you have to do it in this very contrived and fake way. And the so-called religious left, I found to be one of the most glib religious movements ever. And it really was. It was absolutely what Sunnis generally say about Shias and what was said about Jeremiah Wright, which I don't think it was the case about Jeremiah Wright, was absolutely true about that fake religious left. It was a political movement. It was totally contrived and it flopped, and those churches closed down. I mean, they were open for a year and people just didn't want to come because there was no passion there. There was no passion there. There was no belief. You can't start a cancel culture church. You can't do it, right? You can't start a rainbow flag church. You just can't do it. And so I don't know. That was one thing that I did observe that I wanted to comment on. And that around the world, yes, there are revolutionary religious movements. And in American history, there are revolutionary religious movements, but the American government is generally very afraid of them. And that religious left was cringe. I mean, and, you know, I still see it. There's a Reformed Jewish synagogue that I walk by in Manhattan. When I'm in Manhattan, it's like one of the streets that I walk by when I'm going someplace. And I see it, and it's got, you know, a Star of David, and they got a rainbow flag, and they got Black Lives Matter, you know, and I'm okay. You know, I mean, good for them. I mean, I don't know, not my religion, not my cup of tea, but, you know, I mean, it does seem pretty contrived, right? You know, and there's a lot of that. So, yeah, I just, yeah. So just wanted to comment on that. So, yeah, those were just a few things that came to mind when I'm thinking about Shia Islam and other things. And I remember the fakeness of the religious left. I remember sitting in that McDonald's and hearing that guy, and, you know, and it was certainly interesting when you think about these things. But anyway, I wanted to continue reading. So we have read the first 4 chapters of this book, Khrushchevism, A Study in Psychological Warfare. So we have one more chapter left, and then there's the conclusion. So I will read the one more chapter that is left, and we'll see if how much time we have left, how much energy I have left, if we blow through the whole thing tonight, or if we save the conclusion for later. We'll probably do the conclusion on another stream because, you know, these chapters tend to be long. I have a lot to say, but this is the 5th chapter of my book, Khrushchevism, A Study in Psychological Warfare. And this is called Tanks, Statues, and Oedipal Politics. The defeat of the Soviet Union in the Cold War was not largely a military defeat, but a psychological one. Cold War strategist Zbigniew Brzezinski had written about how control of information technology in the technotronic era could be used to Americanize the world, and the U.S. intelligence apparatus had mobilized a series of psychological operations that set the stage for toppling the various Marxist-Leninist governments throughout Eastern Europe. In psychological operations and propaganda, images are very important. One image that was key in Cold War propaganda, for example, was the depiction of Soviet military interventions with tanks. This propaganda trope soon evolved into utilizing tanks as the graphic depiction of the government being demonized. The Prague Spring in Czechoslovakia in 1968 involved an anti-Soviet leader, Alexander Dubček, taking control. Dubček aligned himself with many intellectuals, artists, and privileged youth, children of the party bureaucracy, who were inspired by Western movies, rock music, etc., and harbored resentment against the authoritarianism and censorship of the Soviet-style government. Dubček claimed he was in favor of, quote, socialism with a human face, and that he was a, quote, anti-Stalinist. Dubček's government announced its intention of joining the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and cutting off support for the National Liberation Front of Vietnam and normalizing relations with Israel. Radio Free Europe announced that Dubček was a, quote, transitional figure who would set the stage for the overthrow of communism. The Soviet Union intervened militarily to reinstall the pro-Soviet faction of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia to power. As Soviet troops moved in to enact what was majority opinion in the country against the small, privileged liberal clique that had taken power, Western media was filled with images of young, idealistic, hippie-looking Czech youth standing in front of cold, mechanical Soviet-style military vehicles. As anti-war activists in the United States protested the Democratic National Convention that summer, many of them went to a side demonstration outside the Soviet consulate in Chicago, opposing intervention in Czechoslovakia. While this did not make geopolitical sense, it fit the media narrative. The Prague Spring youth were presented like them, long-haired idealists who wanted freedom. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union appeared similar to what they were fighting against, a cold, authoritarian, militaristic machine that suppressed freedom and creativity. The fact that the Prague Spring was a CIA operation and the Soviet Union was the primary supporter of the Vietnamese people in their struggle for national liberation was lost in the background to a lot of young flower children who loved the Prague Spring and hated the man. A decade later, in 1978, Afghanistan had the Sour Revolution. Pro-Soviet factions of the military seized power to avoid being imprisoned. It has now been revealed that this situation was intentionally engineered by the United States. The People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan took power prematurely and soon found itself facing armed resistance from the deeply conservative Islamic rural population. Brzezinski explained in a 1998 interview with the French newspaper Le Nouvel Observateur that he considered engineering a situation where the Soviet Union would be obligated to militarily intervene in Afghanistan as one of his greatest achievements. He said, quote, "That secret operation was an excellent idea. It had the effect of drawing the Russians into the Afghan trap. And you want me to regret it? The day that the Soviet officials crossed the border, I wrote to President Carter, essentially, quote, we now have the opportunity of giving the USSR its Vietnam War. Indeed, for almost 10 years, Moscow had to carry on war that was unsustainable for the regime. a conflict that brought about the demoralization and finally the breakup of the Soviet Empire. When the Soviet Union sent its military to Afghanistan in 1980, the journalist Philip Banaski visited and observed how Western media completely misrepresented the conflict, giving the impression the country was overrun by tanks. I was supposed to see first, but did not see at all. What I was supposed to see first, I did not see at all. I saw no Soviet soldier. This is the war. Those watching Kabul from New York and Washington saw Soviet soldiers jamming the city streets. In Kabul itself, I saw none. So it would be for the first 8 days I spent in Kabul in January, and almost 2 weeks I would spend there in July, searching for a war, searching for the Russians, searching for an oppressed and tyrannized populace. You read in the press that you would find Kabul choked with Russians, and you were prepared to find them, but found none. Except when pushed through the tangled, uncontrolled traffic, you broke into Revolutionary Square. There it was, the minimal Russian tank. It was a war started as a fictional images on TV. It was a war that took place first in the imagination of millions of Americans and became a strange kind of fact after that. If there had been no intervention here by the West, i.e. the USA, there would have been no war at all. In the 1980s, the British Communist Party became divided between those who defended Soviet foreign policy and those who embraced Euro-communism, the trend of the French, Italian, and Spanish communists who broke with the USSR in 1978. The two factions were called the Euros, for the Euro-communists, and the Tankies. Tanky became a slur for those who would defend governments opposed by Western propaganda and accused of violating human rights. Later, in the Tiananmen Square events of 1989, the image of Tank Man, the lone protester who stood in front of a tank, became an iconic bit of liberal propaganda. Instead of a crowd of protesters around a tank, it had been, as it had been in the images from Czechoslovakia and subsequent US-sponsored unrest in Eastern Europe, this was a single individual. The Tank Man image is a liberal propaganda manifesto. The image tells the age-old tale of David and Goliath, except Goliath is less human than Darth Vader. The image tells us that collectivism and authoritarian states strips us of our humanity and reduce us to being machines. But the lone fight for individualism is heroic and daring. The tank is a very effective lie. It denies the existence of millions of people in Czechoslovakia who supported the Soviet Union, appreciated having universal literacy, electrification, full employment, and rising living standards, while opposing Dubček and his westernized liberal followers. It denies the existence of millions of Afghans who supported the People's Democratic Party and its efforts to bring about industrialization, agricultural improvement, and increased rights for women. It denies the millions of Chinese people who see the Communist Party as a force for good, raising their nation from poverty and elevating China to be the second largest economy in the world. The image of the tank erases the existence of humans backing up and supporting the anti-imperialist state, and makes the state an alien machine that only rules over people. The tank image fits with a lot of Western discourse pushing market liberalization that presents the state as being abstract and disconnected from society, a kind of self-serving monster sucking in taxes and crushing individual initiative, rather than an entity representing specific class interests. The tank image obscures one of the most important realities to understand about Western democracy, as opposed to the various anti-imperialist states it labels dictatorship. The reality is the Communist Party of China, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Bolivarian government of Venezuela, People's Korea, etc., could not stay in power for one moment without a huge, well-organized movement of millions of people who are plugged into local community organizations, carrying out the goals of the ruling party on a local level and taking constant ideological guidance from it. The Basij councils of Iran, the local Communist Party cells in China, the Bolivarian circles of Venezuela, the Citizens' Power Councils of Nicaragua, These are the primary mechanisms through which these regimes are able to hold on to power. People, not machinery, are heavily involved and invested in maintaining the anti-imperialist state and enacting its goals on a local level. Millions of people in China, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, Nicaragua, and other anti-imperialist states, people who are not government bureaucrats, but just average citizens, are heavily involved in the process of governing. Without this kind of deep connection with a well-organized population, these anti-imperialist states could not stay intact. Despite whatever lack of civil liberties, this intense involvement by mass organizations makes these states far more, quote, democratic in the literal sense of the word. The people of anti-imperialist states are constantly involved in governing, carrying out the ruling party's agenda, debating government policy, and enforcing laws and policies. There is far more participation and involvement of the people in, quote, totalitarian states than in, quote, free Western ones. The Western states seem to want their population disengaged and asleep, while the various anti-imperialist states that emerged as a result of what began with Lenin and Stalin rely on an awakened and active population. Unlike Western states, revolutionary governments rely on a very loyal and supportive base. Anti-imperialist states are essentially the result of the kind of mass movements Erich Hoffer decries. When these regimes are unable to awaken and activate this kind of involvement, they are doomed. The tank image completely conceals this important reality. A second image became an essential part of Western imperialist propaganda during the 1990s. This image is a bit more directly Khrushchevist. It is the image of a statue being toppled. Crowds in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union were mobilized to pull down statues of Lenin and other heroes of communism. Photos of these statue toppling events became iconic depictions of the events of 1989 to 1991. Later, when the USA invaded Iraq and overthrew the Ba'athist Arab Socialist government in 2003, American television was filled with images of crowds of people toppling statues of Saddam Hussein. It was later revealed that these were anything but organic or spontaneous celebrations of freedom from the Iraqi people. The event that was shown over and over again on American television was anything but spontaneous. It was revealed by the Los Angeles Times in 2004, quote, as the Iraqi regime was collapsing on April 9th, 2003, Marines converged on Firdaus Square in central Baghdad, site of an enormous statue of Saddam Hussein. It was a Marine colonel, not joyous Iraqi civilians, as was widely assumed in TV images, who decided to topple the statue, the Army report said. It was a quick-thinking Army psychological operations team that made it appear to be a spontaneous Iraqi undertaking. After the colonel, who was not named in the report, selected the statue as the, quote, target of opportunity, the psychological team used loudspeakers to encourage Iraqi civilians to assist, according to an account by a unit member. But Marines had draped an American flag over the statue's face. God bless them, but they were thinking that this is just bad news. The member of the psychological unit said, we didn't want to look like an occupation force. And some of the Iraqis were saying, no, we want an Iraqi flag. Someone produced an Iraqi flag, and a sergeant in the psychological operations unit quickly replaced the American flag. Ultimately, a Marine recovery vehicle toppled the statue with a chain, but the effort appeared to be an Iraqi-inspired because the psychological team had managed to pack the vehicle with cheering Iraqi children. The toppling of the statue has just as much psychological and propaganda value as the tank. It is a display of Oedipal liberation. The adolescent is killing his father and asserting his individuality. The Marxist-Leninist government is presented as the absolutist feudal monarch stomping on the rights of man. The West has hijacked what was originally the communist aesthetic of libidinal release and Oedipal vengeance, the aesthetics of the French Revolution. The king is beheaded. The statue is toppled as the people unleash their righteous anger. Leftism, as an aesthetic, has now become imperialist property. At the same time the Soviet Union fell, one tragic reality of the situation was the lack of opposition to the events from communists around the world. This was not random. The United States had worked relentlessly to court the various communist parties of Europe. All kinds of efforts were made to court the French and Italian intellectuals who dominated European Marxism. Academics were paid to translate and discuss the works of Antonio Gramsci. U.S. academic Joseph Buttigieg, father of Democrat politician Pete Buttigieg, founded the International Gramsci Society. The CIA-funded magazines Der Monat, Encounter, Paris Review, and Partisan Review brought the Frankfurt School, Theodor Adorno, and all kinds of divergent communism that opposed the USSR. In 1978, the French, Spanish, and Italian communists denounced the Soviet Union as Euro-communists. Maoist groups took direction from China, denouncing, quote, Soviet social imperialism. Trotskyites continued their long-standing practice of demonizing the USSR and repeating Western talking points against it. When the USSR fell, the British Communist Party liquidated, as did the Italian Communist Party. The Communist Party USA experienced a dramatic exodus of followers of Angela Davis, who formed committees of correspondence for democracy and socialism and merged into social democracy. The lack of support for communism in Russia among global and particularly Western communists became particularly glaring in 1993, after the USSR had dissolved against the results of the 1991 referendum. The Russian people voted for a parliament that would oppose Boris Yeltsin's austerity measures and economic looting of the country. The mass unemployment, the new waves of crime and drug addiction made conditions in Russia pretty intolerable for much of the population. The Communist Party of the Russian Federation, as well as various nationalist groups, formed the National Salvation Coalition and won a majority in the State Duma. The US-backed President Yeltsin then dissolved the parliament, declaring a state of emergency so his disastrous economic policies could continue. The parliament refused to disband, and the military was sent to crush it. Thousands of Russian communists and others poured into the streets, and the military was dispatched to forcibly disband the Russian State Duma. The result was a series of events described as Black September, or the constitutional crisis. 187 people were killed. The failure of the Russian Communist Party to effectively mobilize in 1993 and later in 1996, when they lost the presidential election in the context of widespread fraud, sealed the fate of the Soviet Union. The mass involvement that anti-imperialist states rely on to stay in power was not there. Public opinion, not just in Russia, but in most former Soviet and Eastern Bloc countries, has consistently said that the fall of the Soviet Union was a negative event and that life was better prior. However, the Soviet communists were unable to inspire a mass movement to defend their state at the key moment, and its dissolution was engineered from above against popular will. The demoralization created by Khrushchev's secret speech can't be separated from this. Khrushchev had effectively deprogrammed much of the population from their enthusiasm for Marxism-Leninism. When Yeltsin justified his dissolving of the elected parliament by claiming the National Salvation Coalition was a, quote, red-brown alliance, he argued that the Russian communists and the nationalists they aligned with represented a combined evil of fascism and communism. He highlighted anti-Semitic statements made by various parliamentarians, and international media largely applauded Yeltsin for violently crushing the democratic will of the Russian people opposing economic looting. Leftists around the world, especially in the West, mostly cheered for the fall of the Soviet Union. In America, the Revolutionary Communist Party marched with banners that said, "Phony communism is dead. Long live real communism." Various Trotskyists celebrated the protests of 1989 as an uprising against Stalinist bureaucracy and argued it would usher in a wave of genuine workers' power. The only organization in the United States that protested against the fall of the Soviet Union was the Workers' World Party, led by Sam Marcy. Marcy was a Trotskyite whose politics became more and more pro-Soviet over the course of the Cold War. His activist sect maneuvered into leading anti-war protests in Washington, D.C. during the 1980s and became the primary, or at least most vocal, hardline American Marxist-Leninist group at the time of the fall of the USSR. Workers' World Party had been a pro-Soviet breakaway from Trotskyism. Sam Marcy, legally named Samuel Balan, was an activist who had been born in Ukraine, moved to the USA as a child, and had a falling out with the Communist Party in the early 1930s. Marcy worked as a labor lawyer and Trotskyite until the Fourth International swung into a more blatantly anti-Soviet direction during the 1950s. His small group of followers in Buffalo had formed a party and eventually built a youth street fighting organization called Youth Against War and Fascism. Marcy ran a kind of counter gang for anti-imperialism that operated primarily in New York City, but had a handful of supporters in other major cities. They engaged in property destruction and theatrical pro-communist and pro-black nationalist demonstrations amid the larger anti-war and anti-racist upsurge. They waved the Vietnamese National Liberation Front flag, and they used the slogan, "Stop the War Against Black America." The group was less ideological and more focused on action, with a group of teenagers and college-aged youth centered around a fatherly man with a foreign accent who instructed them in anti-imperialist activism. YOF members were known for wearing football helmets to protests, prepared to scuffle with the NYPD, and smash windows. Fred Goldstein, a tall and lanky former boxer from the Bronx with communist parents, functioned as Marcy's agitational bulldog and directed street fighting operations. The organization recruited a significant number of anti-war GIs from military bases, forming the American Servicemen's Union. The group also took a blatantly pro-LGBT stance before this was trendy among leftists, bringing in many of New York City's gay activists. Leslie Feinberg, the first openly transgender activist, was a YOF recruit who published The Diary of a Transsexual, describing how she lived as a man despite having female anatomy. As the 1960s political upsurge declined, Marcy oriented his followers to organize liberal and trade union-oriented protests, leading a large anti-racist march in Boston in 1974, and eventually becoming the primary organizer of anti-war protests in Washington, D.C. from 1981 onward. The Communist Party USA supported the Soviet Union, but was always muted in doing so because of its focus on electoral politics and alliance with the Democrats. The Communist Party did not want to alienate labor bosses and liberals, and even had within its own ranks a significant Euro-communist faction that revealed itself with Angela Davis' departure to form the Committees of Correspondence in 1991. The Communist Party represented the Soviet bureaucracy, which saw Reagan as the main threat and wanted liberal politicians in Washington who would enact détente, ease up the arms race, and enable the Soviet Union to bring in more Western investment and technology. The Maoist groups represented Beijing, and while they first had presented an ultra-revolutionary message, they declined significantly during the late 70s as China pivoted into an alliance with Washington and stopped emphasizing Marxism in its foreign policy. Workers' World Party was pro-Soviet while considering the Soviet leaders to be stodgy conservative bureaucrats. Workers' World Party was the party of Kim Il-sung, Mengistu, Castro, and Gaddafi, organizing loud protests to support anti-imperialist states and oppose U.S. wars and interventions, while the Communist Party engaged in muted lobbying among Democrats and pacifist elements. Workers' World Party spoke in defense of the Soviet Union very loudly at the time the Eastern Bloc was falling. At the Socialist Scholars Conference in April of 1990, Sam Marcy gave a speech to a room filled with New Left academics, Trotskyites, and others, urging them not to support the various pro-imperialist, quote, revolutions happening across Eastern Europe. Quote, "They failed to call this most important phenomenon by its class denomination. Is the so-called revolution in Hungary a proletarian revolution because many workers participate in it? Or is it a bourgeois pro-imperialist revolution, a counter-revolution, as a Marxist would call it? Is the transformation in Romania a proletarian revolution, or is it a bourgeois counter-revolution? On this, the socialist scholars are mum. Instead of proceeding according to the norms of Marxist analysis, they have instead adopted an all-embracing definition, an umbrella which suits the bourgeoisie perfectly. It is dinned in our ears day and night by the bourgeoisie first and foremost that these revolutions are anti-Stalinist, period. But Stalinism is a political phenomenon which needs class analysis and elaboration. Can the socialist scholars deny that it is a political phenomenon, but must be reflective of whatever classes exist in the Soviet Union, as well as the USSR's relation to the world struggle, particularly the struggle of imperialism against the socialist countries? To be progressive in relationship to Stalin's policy means, first of all, being thoroughly anti-imperialist and absolutely separate from bourgeois opposition to Stalinism. What's on the order of the day is the struggle against bourgeois restoration. But this is precisely what the Social Democrats want to hide, that the working class in both Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union has to take on the bourgeois restorationist movement, which has brought back the imperialist monopolies, wage cutting, unemployment, and inflation. In the age of satellites and electronics, it is absolutely impossible to have a socialist policy in any metropolitan imperialist country without having a firm, clear, and undeviating policy in relation to imperialism, which is the center of the world economy. The fact that these socialist scholars did not deign to mention imperialism, whose overwhelming effect in Eastern Europe is manifest, demonstrates the bankruptcy of their policy. Workers' World Party began a steady decline following the fall of the USSR. Many members remarked that Sam Marcy had not prepared his followers for such an event ever occurring and had taught them to operate as if such an event like the fall of the Soviet Union was simply not possible. Well, this is certainly understandable, as such an event, a successful color revolution, had not yet occurred until 1989 to 1991. Hindsight is 2020. But it must be pointed out that the reason we can retrospectively see that Workers' World Party did not see the fall of the Soviet Union coming is because of who delivered the death blow. The fall of the USSR was not inflicted by Ronald Reagan's military spending and Cold War escalations, though this certainly made conditions in the USSR worse. The fall of the USSR came from within. Gorbachev and his reformist faction opposed the hardliners and had become westernized. They were in awe of Western movies and consumer culture, and they were convinced that the Western imperialists would allow the Soviet Union to transition to becoming a European welfare state, much like Norway or Sweden. Who westernized the Soviet bureaucracy? It was not conservatives. It was Bernie Sanders, who spent a long time as an emerging politician from Vermont in the USSR, befriending Soviet officials and younger party leaders. It was the anti-nuclear movement that escalated after the Chernobyl disaster and organized joint days of protest in the United States and the Soviet Union against nuclear weapons and energy. It was rock bands that toured the former USSR, performing for crowds of youth who longed for blue jeans and Western consumer goods. It was the art galleries sponsored by George Soros, where young Eastern Bloc artists had their work straying from state-sanctioned socialist realist themes promoted. The fall of the Soviet Union was not engineered by fanatical anti-communists and right-wingers, but by, quote, democratic socialists, quote, humanist Marxists, and others who created a layer of ideological confusion within the Soviet camp and the global left. Many of the youth who rallied behind Yeltsin did not believe they were supporters of Western capitalism. They were just for freedom and human rights. Their genuine grievances against the Soviet system were being manipulated and used, and they saw their country demolished. Workers' World Party did not see the fall of the Soviet Union coming because it had embedded itself and blinded itself to the weaknesses of the very forces that made it happen. In 1989, as the Eastern Bloc countries were being toppled, just as George Herbert Walker Bush had taken office after Ronald Reagan, Workers' World Party held a national protest in Washington, D.C., with a slogan that could have come from the Democratic National Committee: "We won't take 4 more years." While Sam Marcy had always insisted that the party never opposed nuclear power, the party had embedded itself in the anti-nuclear movement, seeing it as, quote, progressive because it opposed the military. The strategy of taking over the movement and becoming leaders of whatever remained of the 1960s peace activism had put Workers' World Party in the position of being stage managers and platformers of the very trend that toppled the governments they supported. As leftism faded among the U.S. public, Workers' World Party maneuvered to control the stage and secure the permits at big rallies. If they could get a crowd of liberal pacifists to listen to a speech from a North Korea sympathizer at a rally around the latest trendy liberal cause, they felt their mission had been accomplished. Sam Marcy's articles from the early 90s mourned the death of Nicolae Ceausescu in Romania and eulogized and celebrated various figures whose statues were being toppled. Meanwhile, his organization focused on building the movement, i.e., mobilizing around liberal causes and opposing Republicans. This ineffective strategy of Workers' World Party, functioning as a liberal activist club, continued into the 1990s. The biggest remnant of Workers' World Party is called the Party for Socialism and Liberation. It is led by Brian Becker, a key organizer of protests against the Iraq War in 2003, who decided to launch his own brand after discovering some new methods of monetizing activism. PSL continues the confused politics of mobilizing liberal, woke youth entranced by liberal social media propaganda, pushing an Oedipal and libidinal message, while claiming to support the deeply conservative, traditional, anti-imperialist states. PSL's neutrality in the Ukraine war, while mouthing support for Navalny's westernized, quote, peace movement, is a sign that PSL will gradually abandon anti-imperialism bit by bit. Funding from pro-China billionaire Roy Singham has enabled PSL to sow confusion and operate the People's Forum in New York City, hoping to mobilize people with anti-imperialist instincts in pro-NATO efforts to oust Trump. When Brian Becker's clique left Workers' World Party in 2004, a solid crew of loyal Marcyites remained in the party and held on for a bit, led by Fred Goldstein. Goldstein fancied himself to be the new Sam Marcy and tried his best to fulfill this role. He composed a book called Low Wage Capitalism after the 2008 financial crisis. Workers' World Party's strategy was to create street heat for Obama against the Tea Party and demand Roosevelt-style economic reforms. Workers' World Party continued to hold annual conferences with 200 to 300 attendees every year, right up into 2017. However, PSL had slick magazines and well-designed, colorful publications compared to the dull newsprint of Workers' World. PSL knew how to recruit liberal activist college kids and controlled the permits in Washington, D.C. They were also far better at raising money internationally and utilizing the internet. Goldstein argued that PSL was not focused on economics and class politics in the same way and held on to more of the orthodoxy of Sam Marcy's politics. But the truth was, regardless of Goldstein's intentions, most of Workers' World Party's leadership just wanted to do the same thing as PSL. PSL was simply better at the kind of protest hustling that defined Workers' World Party in the 80s and 90s. Certain other problems prevented Workers' World Party from carving out a spot as the more class-oriented and ideological alternative to PSL. New young people who showed too much interest in Marxism or could articulate Marxist-Leninist ideas were pushed out for fear they might steal the spotlight from Fred Goldstein, Deirdre Griswold, or Larry Holmes. The talking point was that PSL was racist because some of Workers' World Party's leaders that they opposed prior to leaving had been black, and that became a cemented aspect of Workers' World Party's internal culture. With Fred Goldstein getting older and less active, spending months on the beaches of the south of France, and new energy simply not tolerated, Workers' World Party was doomed. However, Workers' World Party couldn't completely fade into obscurity without one last ironic and symbolic tragedy. After the Charlottesville riot in 2017, Workers' World Party members in North Carolina got a huge amount of media attention for toppling a local Confederate statue. Toppling Confederate statues and portraying Trump supporters as white supremacists was all the rage in mainstream media at the time. And Workers' World Party gained some brief relevance in the political conversation as a wave of woke anti-Trump activists in southern states joined its ranks, inspired by Black Lives Matter. The clique of activists in North Carolina who had joined Workers' World Party in 2003 to 2012 and laid the foundation for this slight uptick a few years later had never been communists and were identity politics liberals. They attended UNC Chapel Hill and other elite colleges. They were impressed by Leslie Feinberg and Workers' World Party's history of being pro-transgender. They had insisted that the works of Bell Hooks and Judith Butler be studied alongside Marx and Lenin. One college-aged trans activist was a member in Durham for 2 entire years before she found out that Workers' World Party supported North Korea, showing how little interest in anti-imperialism there was among the local party branch. The main way Durham members were recruited was by being employed or by engaging in the activities of a well-funded liberal nonprofit quietly run by a party member. This layer of liberal rich kids were classist and rude when attending national events. If other young members from different regions introduced themselves and tried to be friendly, they would simply look at them and laugh rudely. Despite their arrogance and sense of superiority, they also perfected the art of targeting people with accusations of being racist, sexist, or transphobic, and learned to show off how well versed in gender and race studies they were during the process of taking down some longtime elderly party activist who made a mistake, or a youth from a more working class background who did not have the luxury of attending one of the elite schools dubbed the Ivy League of the South. The North Carolina rich kids got very uncomfortable ever discussing party positions on Syria, Iran, or Russia. The speeches they gave at local rallies put on by the Democrat Party focused on white supremacy bad and black youth need opportunities. The North Carolina recruits got a free pass from party leadership in all of their bullying and non-Marxist politics. Why? They brought in the money. An NGO was set up, and money from the Ford Foundation, George Soros, nonprofits set up by local tobacco companies and real estate magnates made sure that North Carolina members were always paid to do their party activism. The money always served as a convenient excuse for concealing the party's tanky politics. Don't want to have trouble with the grant money. Plenty of money trickled back to New York, making Marcy's appointed successors quite delighted. Members of North Carolina began taking over national committee meetings, turning them into kindergarten group therapy sessions where members threw cute bouncy balls instead of raising their hands to be recognized and talked about their fears and anxiety rooted in childhood trauma. Because they had the money, the North Carolina rich kids began purging those who challenged their authority. Between 2015 and 2017, Workers' World Party pushed out the remaining ideological Marcyites. An older woman was expelled for making a Facebook post expressing concern about transgender people being in the bathroom with her granddaughters. The Detroit branch was pushed out with one of the charges against them that they held an international conference against austerity with representatives of the Spanish and Greek communist parties and had dared call it a conference against austerity rather than a conference against austerity and white supremacy, the party went into full woke mode, doubling down on supporting liberals, demonizing Trump and all who would support him, and embracing cancel culture. And as they did it, they held up the North Carolina youth who had toppled the statue in Durham as a great example. People who understood economics, could give a defense of People's Korea, or knew the ideology were labeled as autistic white males. The ideal recruit was a pink-haired, nose-ringed, 20-year-old trust fund kid who got fired up at the notion of anyone being misgendered with the wrong pronouns. The chant was, "Do it like Durham! Do it like Durham!" A poster was created to promote the 2017 Workers' World Party Conference that showed an image that looked almost like it had come from the events of 1989 that Sam Marcy opposed. The poster for the 2017 Workers' World Party National Convention showed a crowd of people pulling down a statue in a gleeful display of Oedipal rage. 400 people packed into a hotel in New Jersey to chant, "Do it like Durham, do it like Durham," in the biggest conference the Workers' World Party had had since the PSL split. The event was little more than a Democrat Party anti-Trump rally. Ironically, though, this was the last national conference Workers' World Party ever had. Here's the poster, just so you can see it. There it is. It looks just like the fall of the Soviet Union, right? They're pulling down a statue, right? Pulling down the statue. The crowd of young woke activists who pulled in largely from North Carolina soon accused the Baltimore branch of the party of covering up sexual misconduct. Shrill accusations of rape apologism, covering up sexual assault, and not believing victims were made all across social media. What actually happened in Baltimore is hard to determine, with conflicting stories and versions of events. What is clear is that recruiting all these shrill, liberal-minded youth had brought all of their Oedipal and libidinal energy into the party in a way that the leaders could not control. The entire Baltimore branch, including longtime dedicated activists who had been members for 50 years and played a key role in organizing during the 2015 riots, were expelled. Soon, the Los Angeles branch left as well. North Carolina demanded that other party members be expelled simply for being friendly with other people who had already been expelled, or for not echoing condemnations of those who had been expelled loudly enough. The fight went on for 2 years, with no national conferences and very little activism taking place. Instead, it was an endless slew of national committee conference calls demanding more apologies and more expulsions amid leaked emails, more screenshots of, quote, problematic social media posts, etc. In an episode of explosive rage, a group of young members from New York City, Durham, and other parts of the country drove to the party offices of the recently expelled Baltimore branch and vandalized them, smashing computers and spray painting the walls. The elderly Fred Goldstein himself even resigned after the atmosphere of crazed record drama and shrill accusations became too intolerable even for him, with some of his best friends and most sycophantic worshipers being pushed out. So since the 2017 Do It Like Durham event, Workers' World Party has not convened a national conference. No conference could be called during the 2-year drama and massive expulsions and resignations. And now, as the dust has cleared, there are too few members left. The expression, "go woke, go broke," comes to mind. As of today, Workers' World Party has less than 30 members. They did it like Durham and embraced destructive, libidinal politics of leftism while shedding whatever was left of their ideological, anti-imperialist, and illiberal roots. The very impulses and wokeism they embraced destroyed them. The statue-toppling, trans-obsessed, woke adolescents who had been empowered and given a free pass by the party leadership destroyed the party. What happened to Workers' World Party is an odd microcosm showing what has happened to the global Marxist-Leninist movement and what has happened to various communist countries. Communism is very much stamped by the aesthetics and psychology of the bourgeois revolution. The very terms left and right go back to the National Assembly of France that was formed after the king was overthrown. The more radical forces sat on the left, with the more conservative elements that were loyal to the king sitting on the right. Leftism became an international trend with the Spring of Nations of 1848, when uprisings took place across Europe demanding democratic republics. Red Republicans were those who wanted to create some kind of egalitarian socialist society inspired by the ideals of the French Revolution. The Communist Manifesto was published in 1848 as a statement explaining the principles of Karl Marx's Communist League that participated in the German uprising. Communism as a movement embraced libidinal and Oedipal aesthetics and values of the French Revolution. Dialectical materialism denies spirituality and says that all that exists is matter, but this matter is constantly in a state of motion and conflict, driving forward history. Balance and order are rejected, with conflict, upheaval, and contradiction and struggle seen as the eternal good and motor force of progress. This is not entirely wrong. Conflict and struggle are certainly important parts of life and motors for progress, but they are not the only force. Many things in the universe have a contradictory and unifying nature. For example, the solar system. In the dialectical materialist worldview, the planets are held together, and the orbit is the result of gravity from the sun and the planets pulling on each other in a contradictory and conflicting way. However, someone else may look at the solar system and the rotation of the planets and see order and mathematics and predictability. In reality, the solar system has both. There is conflicting gravitational pull, but there is also order and predictability. Sexual intercourse is another great example. The dialectical materialist points to sex as an act of contradiction, body parts clashing with each other, enhancing arousal. However, despite the emotional intensity, sex is generally a very unifying and connecting experience. When sex is done in the form of a violent confrontation, this is a horrific thing called rape. While sex has elements of confrontation and contradiction in it, it also has elements of unity and connection. The dialectical materialist worldview points to a very big aspect of reality, an aspect that was completely obscured by the feudal society and its perspective. Dialectical materialism says there is no spirituality, while feudalism insists everything was spiritual and worked overtime to pressure people to overcome any complaints they had about their lives by focusing on a heavenly afterlife or obedience to God. Dialectical materialism celebrates struggle as the highest form of good and the best way to advance history, while feudal society forbade and harshly punished any kind of struggle and rebellion, keeping people in the social position they were born into and demanding absolute submission and obedience to supposed natural superiors. Leftism was a response to the harshness of feudalism. It was unleashing of libidinal and Oedipal impulses to destroy the old society. The Oedipal and libidinal impulses served their purpose. The libido, the natural attraction to sex and violence, serves its purpose in the human mind. The Oedipal drive, the desire of a child to murder their parents and displace their authority, is also natural. Marxist psychoanalyst Reuben Osborne described the Oedipus complex. Quote, "The Oedipus complex, so called after the play by Sophocles, in which Oedipus, in fulfillment of prophecy, unwittingly kills his own father and marries his mother. The infantile sexual strivings are for gratification with the parent of the opposite sex, while antagonistic and death wishes are entertained toward parents of its own sex. However, these impulses are balanced out by another drive, parental transference. The longing for a powerful, caring parent to provide love and guidance is also innate. Osborne describes how parental transference routinely plays out in therapeutic relationships between clients and psychoanalysts. Quote, "An emotional relationship develops between the analyst and the patient, known as transference, involving the transferring to some of the analyst of emotions and impulses of some unsatisfied earlier relationships. The patient thus relives the emotional situations responsible for his complaint, and the analyst comes to represent now one, now the other of people towards whom the patient has had an emotional relationship. He may represent, for example, the patient's father, and the infantile attitude is directed toward him with its contradictory emotions of love and hate. This double or ambivalent attitude in which an object is both loved and hated as the result of conflicting impulses makes the task of the analyst a very delicate one. As Freud says, it is undeniable that in his endeavor to emerge victorious over the transference phenomenon, the psychoanalyst is faced with the greatest difficulties. But it should not be forgotten that it is just these difficulties that render us the invaluable service of making the patient's buried and forgotten love expectations current and manifest. For in the last resort, no one can be vanquished in absentia or in effigy. The final aim of the analyst is to make conscious the relationship of transference so that the patient recognizes the role of the analyst and the nature of the conflicting emotions felt towards him. In doing so, he is enabled to rid himself of dependence on the analyst and recognize the root causes of his difficulties. Sigmund Freud himself was an atheist, seemed particularly amused by religion and feelings associated with it among his clients. In his text, Civilization and Its Discontents, he observed, "It is a feeling which he would call a sensation of eternity, a feeling of something limitless and unbounded, as it were oceanic. This feeling," he adds, "is a purely subjective fact, not an article of faith. It brings with it no assurance of personal immortality, but a source of religious energy seized upon by various churches and religious systems, directed by them into particular channels, and doubtless exhausted by them. One may, he thinks, rightly call himself religious on the grounds of this oceanic feeling, even if one rejects every faith and every illusion. I can imagine that the oceanic feeling became connected with religion later on. The oneness of the universe that constitutes its identational content sounds like a first attempt at religious consolation, as though it were another way of disclaiming the danger which the ego recognizes as threatened by the external world." Freud went on to describe religion as fulfilling the deeply innate psychological needs. Quote, "A feeling can only be a source of energy if it is itself the expression of a strong need. The derivation of religious needs from the infant's helplessness and the longing for the father aroused by it seem to be incontrovertible, especially since the feeling is not simply prolonged from childhood days, but is permanently sustained by fear of the superior power of fate. I cannot think any need in childhood as strong as the need for a father's protection. Thus, the part played by the oceanic feeling, which might seek something like restoration of limitless narcissism, is ousted from a place in the foreground. Oedipal feelings flare up when they are most necessary, in the teen and early adult years. They drive the young person to establish their independence, go out into the world, and start their own family. The Oedipal feelings fade as independence is established and comfort in adulthood sets in, and then feelings of parental transference return. Many will describe feeling full of rebellion and anger in their teens and 20s, and then finding a kind of conservative state of mind in their late 20s as they look for order and security in adulthood with its new responsibilities. However, the decaying culture of globalism imperialism has robbed millions of young people of the dignity of adulthood. They are stuck living with their parents, unable to support themselves financially or to have marriages and children. Stuck in a state of semi-permanent teenage existence, these psychologically wounded youth are mesmerized by social media that prolongs and extends their libidinal and Oedipal feelings to great lengths. It is also worth noting that in our age of social atomization, there are many parents who really do not wish to see their children go out on their own. While they resent their adult offspring for living off them and being a financial burden, they enjoy the leverage this gives them and the safety and power of the relationship where one party is dependent on them. A kind of toxic parent who is desperate to keep their adult child living with them as a dependent, as a source of companionship, is all too common in our time. The underlying resentment that an adult living with such a parent has is astronomical. However, it must be psychologically repressed. If the adult is going to keep living with their parent, they cannot allow themselves to truly acknowledge the astronomical rage they are feeling at the humiliation of living as a teenager at the age of 30 or older. So massive rage at the parent becomes transferred into Oedipal propaganda. They want to tear down various bullies they are informed of on social media as an outlet for rage at the parent whose dominion they feel trapped under. The height of communist influence in the Western countries came just prior to the Second World War, when communists led the People's Front, broad anti-fascist coalitions. During this period, 2 psychoanalytic texts were composed by British communist and psychoanalyst Reuben Osborne, seeking to find common ground between Marxism and Freudianism. The first, Freud and Marx, a dialectical study, attempted to show an overlap between the two worldviews, but at the end urged Marxists to rethink their propaganda in light of the rise of fascism. Osborne wrote about the role of parental transference in fascist propaganda. Quote, "The emotional attitudes developed towards the leader, the psychoanalytic view that they are displacements of an original child-parent relationship which ascribes omnipotence to the parent. We return to our question. How can we consciously develop the leadership of the masses in light of the above facts? The first necessarily would seem to crystallize the leadership in the shape of a leader, someone who may be referred to in such terms as will awaken the required emotional attitudes. In other words, we must idealize for the masses some one individual to whom they will turn for support, whom they will love and obey. If then the problem of leadership is important, it must be tackled in a consciously thought out manner which utilizes all that modern psychology has to offer on the subjective characteristics involved. And if psychology tells us that no movement will win the support of the masses, which does not offer a leader who adequately arouses emotional attitudes, which are seen relate to the child-parent situation, then a movement which boasts of its scientific outlook must hasten to provide such a leader. If Hitler and Mussolini, by deliberate publicity and propaganda methods, can be presented as saviors of the people, so too can communist leaders. The difference, of course, is that the reputation of communist leaders will not be built upon deceitful promises and demagogic flourishes, but upon a genuine determination to lead the workers in revolutionary struggle. Osborne's second text, The Psychology of Reaction, takes this theme to a much further extent. Osborne points out that nationalism and patriotism are themselves a form of parental transference. Quote, in other words, the adult lavishes his unsatisfied love and hate on objects and persons, which are substitutes for the objects and persons of childhood. In this light, we can see that nationalism performs an important psychological role, for there is a striking symbolic parallel between the adult's attitude toward his native land and the early childhood relationship to his parents. This is illustrated in the use of terms like motherland and fatherland. Towards the land in which he was born, the individual feels the attitude which he first felt toward his mother who bore him. His motherland nourishes and sustains him in the same way as did his own mother. Towards his native land, therefore, the individual directs the unsatisfied love and affection which were denied outlet during childhood. This symbolic representation of the mother by the countries of one's birth receives vivid form in many turns of speech. Thus, one hears reference to the country which bore one rather than the country in which they were born. And the threat of enemy invasion is referred to as a threat of violation of the motherland. Nor are these mere metaphorical representations. He describes how communists' failure to respect or properly orient toward feelings of loyalty to one's country has been a weakness. Quote, "For the socialist who derides with blank incomprehension his fellow men's feelings of nationalism runs the risk of appearing to them as an intellectual monstrosity who denies a vital fact of human nature. The hostility and repugnance that this denial provokes often takes the form of accusation, for which effectiveness in stirring prejudice against socialism is unequaled. The socialist and communist who denies the validity of national feelings provokes the taunt that socialists love every country but their own. For to suggest that the socialist loves every country but their own signifies to the unconscious mind that the socialist loves every woman but his own mother. The socialist must revise his conception of internationalism. He must not regard internationalism as a replacement for nationalism. For this is to ignore the very real ties between people and their land. The internationalism at which socialists should aim is a union of nations free to develop their own cultures and specific forms of national consciousness, economically united on the basis of socialism. The Oedipal and libidinal aesthetics, the Oedipal and libidinal aesthetics that were once the property of communism, are now the primary vehicles that imperialism utilizes to overthrow anti-imperialist governments. The color revolutions, in which crowds of young, passionate youth face off against cold mechanical tanks and topple statues of figures presented as cruel tyrants, show that the aesthetics of communism have been stripped of their revolutionary role. They serve imperialism, and very effectively. Meanwhile, what began with Stalin, anti-imperialist states appealing to a kind of traditionalism and feeling of parental transference, is stronger than ever. Statues of Mao Zedong and Confucius are erected alongside each other in Xi Jinping's China. Both figures are symbols of China's collectivism and non-Western identity. Soldiers in Donbass march with Orthodox Christian icons and hammers and sickles. Soviet communism and Russian Orthodoxy are both part of Russia's unique, non-Western collectivist identity. The anti-imperialist state offers security from the chaos of the market. It offers the preservation of the traditional family and centuries-old values threatened by Western liberal culture. The socialist state offers collective security and a constant effort to increase living standards, while the West offers autonomy and, quote, freedom that comes with no such security. This all raises serious questions about how an anti-imperialist organization can be created in the confusing atmosphere of our times. And that's the end of the last chapter of the book. So I think that I will actually just read the conclusion now, because we're just past 2 hours, 2 hours and 18 minutes. And I really like to finish this so I can just put up the whole audiobook. So we're going to finish the book. I hope you all are enjoying it. I seem to see people liking it in the chat. I'm proud of this book. This is an important book that is the result of a lot of studying and a lot of research and a lot of efforts. So I'm going to read the final section of the book here. I'm going to read the conclusion. And then we'll have the full audiobook to premiere next week. All right, here we go. Conclusion: winning the psychological war. I will never forget the day in December of 2015 when I sat in central Caracas inside Comuna Pinal, the Beehive Commune. The facility was a stronghold of supporters of Nicolas Maduro and his predecessor, Hugo Chavez. Many of those who live in Comuna Pinal are members of the Bolivarian militias, paramilitary groups set up to defend the socialist government of Venezuela, in addition to the regular armed forces. There was a new basketball court that had just been paved and a new radio station that broadcast revolutionary messages. I sat in a room filled with revolutionary books, posters, and computers and listened to the commune's director of security, a 25-year-old woman named Anacona. She wore khaki military-style pants and proudly talked about her heritage, which was a mixture of indigenous and Afro-Venezuelan roots. She talked about how learning that Hugo Chavez had similar ethnic background made her very proud as a child. When asked about the election results, in which the opposition had made significant gains, she scoffed. "They'll never come back," she said. "We're not the same people that we once were." As I sat with a translator, we learned Anacona's story. She had been a homeless child on the streets of Caracas. She had been unable to speak Spanish, only the indigenous language of her parents, who had taken her to the city and abandoned her after the living conditions in the countryside had deteriorated. She had been adopted by a Catholic priest who raised her in his orphanage. The priest who adopted her was a liberation theologist who taught her a set of beliefs that mixed Catholic theology with Marxism-Leninism. Each Sunday, when Hugo Chavez gave his Allo Presidente broadcasts, she and the other orphans watched attentively. He had directed them to read books, and together she and the other children had studied Lenin's What Is to Be Done, Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, and other important texts. Chavez was my father, Anacona told us. Anacona had helped establish Comuna Pinal when Chavez had called for the creation of socialist cities in his final years of life. She explained, "We studied the communes of China. We studied Hezbollah in Lebanon. We wanted to create model communities that could be the base areas for Bolivarian socialism in Venezuela and continue the revolution." And then she said to us, "I am a religious person, and I believe God brought me to this earth to die for Hugo Chavez. And I hope I will have the opportunity to give my life for the revolution." Over a decade later, I marvel at how the United Socialist Party and Nicolas Maduro have been able to remain in power in Venezuela, despite so much opposition, so many coup attempts, sanctions making life so difficult. The reason Bolivarian socialism is still in power is because of people like Anacona. The spiritual power, the fanaticism, the dedication that Western liberalism is so utterly terrified of is what held Venezuela together. It is the same thing that has enabled Ibrahim Traoré to mobilize an agricultural boom in Burkina Faso. Much like Stalin did with his 5-year plans in Russia, an African military leader who is both a Muslim and a Marxist is leading an impoverished African nation to become a farming giant that can embolden the entire continent. Traoré is doing this with support from Russia and its military contractors, as well as investment from Chinese state-controlled corporations. Across the former Soviet Union, there is a widespread, though far from universal, belief that Joseph Stalin was a Christian. The history books seem pretty solidly to confirm that Stalin was an atheist and a strict adherent of the Marxist-Leninist philosophy of dialectical materialism, which rejects any notion of spiritual forces, seeing human thought as merely a reflection of matter that thinks. Not only did Stalin profess a belief in dialectical materialism, he authored many books on it and gave many lectures on the concept, even calling out other Marxists for not being properly adept in the philosophical side of their ideology. And yet, across Russia, one finds Orthodox Christians who carry images of Stalin with a halo around his head. This is loudly denounced by many others, but the practice has not stopped. A church in Georgia recently erected a sacred image honoring Stalin and his mother. The legend of Christian Stalin is much more intricate than just a suspicion that he privately practiced the faith. These are images of Stalin icons, right? Russians with Stalin with a halo around his head. The legend of Christian Stalin is much more intricate than just a suspicion that he privately harbored admiration for Jesus Christ. There are legends of a boy in Siberia who was visited by an angel who told him to visit Stalin and tell him to legalize the church as a way to defeat the Nazis. There are veterans of the Battle of Stalingrad who swear they saw angels in the sky casting lightning bolts down at the Nazi invaders. There is no official version of the Christian Stalin legend, and it seems to be denounced by every accredited authority on religious matters. The legend of the leader of the Russian Communist Party, Gennady Zyuganov, is a Russian Orthodox convert, and he gives a Christmas message each year on behalf of the party, presenting Jesus as the first communist, similar to how Hugo Chavez spoke in Venezuela. Communism and pride in Soviet achievements, along with Orthodox Christianity, form a part of the new Russian patriotism, a vaguely defined set of values that seem to be both deeply conservative and very collectivist, and opposed to Western individualism and greed. It is certainly true that Stalin attended seminary school prior to joining the Bolsheviks. The modestly sympathetic British Stalin biographer Simon Sebag Montefiore references a kind of religious rhetorical style in his book Young Stalin. Quote, Stalin was hostile to bumptious intellectuals, but he was less so with educated worker revolutionaries who did not arouse his inferiority complex. He played the teacher, the priest. The workers listened reverently to the young preacher. And it was no coincidence that many of the revolutionaries were ex-seminarists and the workers often pious ex-peasants. Trotsky, agitating in another city, remembered that many of the workers thought the movement resembled the early Christians and had to be taught that they should be atheists. Much of Trotsky's criticism of Stalin and his belief that it became much of Trotsky's criticism of the Soviet Union and his belief that it became bureaucratized and a degenerated workers' state is rooted in a critique of the spiritual aesthetics of the Soviet state. Trotsky saw the glorification of the Soviet family, the outlawing of abortion, the culture of self-sacrifice and patriotism that came to define really existing socialism as repugnant. After all, the official ideological difference between Stalin and Trotsky had been the question of permanent revolution. Trotsky wanted the Soviet Union to be militarized and to function as merely a temporary holdout in a struggle to march communism into Western Europe. Stalin, on the other hand, advocated socialism in one country. Trotsky's biography of Stalin begins on the first page with denunciations of Stalin as Asiatic and not properly Western or civilized, calling him Genghis Khan. In our time, when the West is deteriorating and a new economy is rising in the East, building on the foundations of the Russian and Chinese revolutions, two events Stalin had a huge amount to do with, Trotsky's observations are worth revisiting. What was the essence of Trotsky's disagreement with Lenin prior to joining the Bolsheviks in July of 1917, and his ultimate break with Stalin and defection from the USSR 10 years later in 1927? When Stalin formed the Bolshevik Party in 1903, when Lenin formed the Bolshevik Party in 1903, He did so as a fundamental break with European social democracy. He replaced the liberal, open organizational methods with his party of new type and democratic centralism. He eventually replaced the basic workers versus bosses understanding of European Marxists with his theory of imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. Lenin said that nationalism of the oppressed and colonized people should be supported, even if it had a non-Marxist and anti-working class character. Lenin said that the working class of Western countries was becoming stratified and that the revolutionary energy would come from the colonized world, with the working class leading the struggle to break entire nations free from imperialist domination. Trotsky rejected Lenin's call to form a party of new type. He instead opted to form a grouping called the August Bloc that would function as a more radical wing of social democracy and the Second International. He simply wanted to build a slightly more radical version of it. He did not consider the Social Democrats of the British Labour Party or German imperialism to be his enemies. They were just moderates with a milder interpretation of what he believed. Furthermore, Trotsky loathed the peasantry. His theory of permanent revolution insisted that countries like Russia and China, where there was a peasant majority, could not build full socialism. He rejected Lenin's call for a revolutionary dictatorship of workers and peasants because he saw peasants as inherently backward. He condemned the Chinese Revolution in the 1930s, warning that despite having communist leaders, its focus on organizing the peasantry would doom it to failure. Trotsky opposed Stalin's call for Chinese communists to enter a united front with the nationalist KMT, instead wanting them to condemn the KMT and build working class opposition to it. Trotsky condemned the Communist International for focusing on exposing social democrats after the Sixth World Congress, instead arguing they should seek a united front. He then condemned the Communist International for building the People's Front against fascism in alliance with democratic capitalists after the Seventh World Congress, seeing it as a betrayal of the, quote, class line between the workers and the bosses. Trotsky was a classical Marxist. Lenin took the very first steps out of Europe, forming what racists like Trotsky would deem to be an Asiatic organization to liberate colonized people from globalism imperialism. Stalin took this even further, unleashing miracles of industrialization with a planned economy, but appealing to the country in a spirit of collectivism and brotherhood rather than Marxism's usual appeal on the basis of class hatred and vengeance. What began with Stalin has continued with Mao and Deng Xiaoping, with African socialism, with Baathist Arab socialism, with Bolivarianism, with not capitalism but Islam in Iran, with Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso, with the Houthis in Yemen, and so many other amazing anti-imperialist movements that have sprouted on the foundations of Marxism-Leninism. However, the various anti-imperialist and colonial movements have continued maturing, shedding the leftist roots of Marxism-Leninism to a higher spiritual plane. The message of the Communist Party of China is one of community, patriotism, love of family, and constructive optimism. The Cultural Revolution is deemed to have been a bitter mistake. Vietnam's socialism-oriented market economy puts out a similar optimistic, constructive vibe. Meanwhile, Marxism-Leninism as a movement has completely deteriorated in the West. Trotskyism and anarchism seem dominant, but even the traditional communist parties with Comintern lineage rarely take anti-imperialist stances. When Russia moved in to protect the Donetsk People's Republic and the People's Republic of Lugansk against the Western-backed fanatics who burn World War II memorials, few Western communist parties dared to support them. Russia was deemed conservative and fascist, while Ukraine's pro-Western regime was laced with rainbow flags and nose piercings on social media. Khrushchevism worked as a mechanism for dismantling the Soviet-aligned movement around the world, and it continues to be effective right up to today because it plays on certain weaknesses within communism itself. The spirit of rebellion, the resentment and distrust of authority, the celebration of unleashing impulses, the desire to decapitate the king and tear down his statue, the indulgence of a desire for nonconformity, merely for nonconformity's sake, the celebration of oneself as an enlightened free thinker, a philosopher king, with the rest of humanity as mere sheep, the lack of humility and willingness to give oneself to a higher cause or work in admiration and love for an effective teacher, the endless striving to be the main character in a drama, the fear of being perceived as a follower, the shame of admitting you have been guided and educated or made an error and been forgiven. All of these sentiments that make up the pillars of the Khrushchevist wrecker mentality are highly present in those who are attracted to communist aesthetics and drawn to identifying as communists in Western society, where it is considered a deviant and subversive identity. The truth is that all of us feel we are Winston in George Orwell's 1984 sometimes. To have anti-imperialist views in this society renders such feelings of isolation and fear of the masses almost impossible to avoid. However, these feelings must be actively fought against. They are not the basis of a revolutionary movement. And in the context of our Oedipal and libidinal culture, they can only play a destructive and demobilizing role. To be a revolutionary in our time means actively fighting against Khrushchevism and anti-populism, and learning to give yourself to a higher cause. It means learning the joy of comradeship and trusting surrender to embrace the collective effort of an organization. Plants are alive. Cats and dogs are alive. Mice, insects, sheep and cattle, weeds in the garden, and roses are all alive. However, they are not alive. They are alive only in the biological sense. They are not alive in the human way. As Frederick Engels explained, in short, the animal merely uses its environment and brings about changes in it by its presence. Man, by his changes, makes it serve his ends and masters it. This is the final essential distinction between man and other animals, and once again, it is labor that brings about this distinction. Human beings exercise agency. They take the environment around them and reinvent it. They innovate. Animals and plants just go through the motions, exercising no agency. They respond to stimuli, avoiding pain, seeking pleasure. They can be nudged by nature around them, but they can never master it. They are asleep. The sad reality is that globalism, imperialism has rendered most human beings into a similar state of being. They are only living biologically. They are asleep. They exercise no agency. They do not innovate. They do not intervene in the world around them. They are technically alive in the biological sense, but they are not truly alive. They are only living biologically. What makes human beings unique, unlike other species, is our ability to transcend this state. We have the ability to awaken. Ants have been making their ant farms the same way for thousands of years. Bees have been making their beehives the same way for thousands of years. Beavers have been constructing their beaver dams the same way for thousands of years. But in just a few thousand years, 7,000 or 8,000 years, approximately, human beings have completely revolutionized their relationship with the natural world over and over again. We've gone from hunter-gatherers in the woods to space travel, iPhones, and 3D printers, artificial intelligence, and so many other wonders. Marx knew this, and his conception of historical materialism was an understanding of the big picture of human history. Marx understood that humans were constantly propelling themselves to a higher mode of production, a higher life expectancy, a higher population, more comfort, a higher level of intellectual capacity. Marx understood that new modes of production gave birth to new political and social forms. The origin of private property and the state came with the transition from hunter-gatherer civilization to agriculture and the domestication of animals. Slavery gave way to a higher mode of production called feudalism, which brought new political forms. Feudalism gave way to capitalism. Each time the population expanded, the productive capacity grew, the life expectancy increased, and the level of freedom and individual autonomy also increased. Marx understood and documented that capitalism created the problem of glut, overproduction, or value crisis, where poverty was created by abundance. Technological advancement and increased efficiency in production resulted in greater poverty and a lower rate of profit for employers. He understood that this would necessitate society coming together to centralize the instruments of production and organize the economy rationally, so growth was no longer restrained by the anarchy of production. As Engels explained, socialism harnesses the productive capacity of capitalism in a rational way. The difference is as that between the destructive force of electricity in a lightning storm and the electricity under the command in the telegraph and voltaic arc. The difference between a conflagration and fire working in the service of man. With this recognition at last of the real nature of the productive forces of today, the social anarchy of production gives way to social regulation of production upon a definite plan, according to the needs of the community and of each individual. The proletariat seizes political power and turns the means of production into state property. Marx very much saw the proletariat, the emerging majority of wage workers, as the class with the most to gain from such a transformation, and he envisioned the labor movement becoming political and striving to win the battle for democracy and raise the working class to the level of the ruling class, with the dictatorship of the proletariat, to centralize the instruments of production in the hands of the state and increase the total productive forces as rapidly as possible. Marx built a movement that was very much intended to be adjacent to labor unions, setting the stage for labor unions and political parties aligned with them to seize control of the state and create a planned economy. Marx saw this centrally planned economy managed by popular working class government as the first stage of communism, called socialism by Marxist-Leninists. He understood that it would eventually create so much wealth and abundance by eliminating the irrationality of the market and restraints on technological advancement that it would give way to the higher stage of communism, i.e., a society where all inequality had faded away, along with all hierarchies and social coercion, with the state itself fading away as society inscribed on its banners, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. Lenin's understanding that capitalism had moved to the stage of imperialism and that the working class in the imperialist countries was being divided and stratified, and that socialism would come through the struggles of colonized people for national liberation, was a solid break with classical Marxist thinking. But it was an accurate assessment of how the world was moving in the aftermath of Marx's life. Social democracy remained stuck in the mindset of workers versus bosses. Leninism moved on to the struggle of entire nations and colonized people against imperialism. In our time, the most fundamental economic principles of Marx and Lenin's ideas are more important than ever, but they are completely obscured. The problem of value crisis and technology creating poverty amid abundance and a falling rate of profit is truer than ever before. The AI economy and the various warnings about self-driving cars hammer this home constantly. Yet Marxists in the West generally believe the problem with capitalism is that there is never enough. It just wants endless growth. Marxists tend to believe that growth is bad, poverty is beautiful, and they accept neoliberal claims that the market can produce endless growth. They just think this is undesirable. Rather than calling for a rationally planned and centralized economy to unleash productive forces, leftists routinely argue for what Marx strongly opposed in Critique of the Goethe Program, the redistribution of income. Bernie Sanders' Democratic Socialist platform did not call for a single nationalization of any industry, yet it talked of abolishing billionaires by taxing people. The spirit of jealousy and anger at the rich, who just want more and more, is everywhere. The actual economics of capitalism, restricting humanity's creative abilities, are absent. What passes for Marxism in America is largely rhetoric on how unfair the relationship between employers and employees is, and calls for the creation of cooperative enterprises that would function according to the profit motive. Furthermore, Lenin's concept of imperialism is more relevant than ever as humanity is breaking free from it. Lenin made clear that imperialism was about holding back development and preventing countries from developing their own economies, forcing them to remain impoverished captive markets and client states. China's Belt and Road Initiative is enabling countries in Africa and Asia and Latin America to flourish, raise people from poverty, and construct infrastructure. However, Marxists and Leninists generally think China is imperialist because enabling these countries to build power plants and railways, to export their natural resources, and to expand their farming sectors is exploiting them. Western communists view indigenous tribes without electricity and modern technology as free, and think imperialism is about imposing modernity onto them and taking away their indigenous beauty as noble savages. Rage at Western civilization and whiteness is certainly everywhere, but any understanding of the economics of imperialism is completely absent. All of this points to a reality that may seem obvious, but is very hard for some to digest. There must be a spiritual break with leftism in order to preserve the economics and understanding of human historical development. Marxism and communism are about seething in rage and jealousy at the rich, wanting to cut off their heads and tear them down. Marxism and communism are about hating the disgusting West and admiring beautiful primitive peoples not tainted by corrupting modernity. The emotions haven't changed. These are the emotions of the red flag rooted in the French Revolution and the guillotine. These are the emotions and psychology of Trotsky's permanent revolution and the Cultural Revolution in China, May of 1968 in the streets of Paris, and leftism. Leftism has become a destructive force. The socialist governments of the world no longer speak in a leftist way. It is imperialism and its color revolution industry that has hijacked the revolutionary aesthetic. The Center for Political Innovation took the innovationist turn in 2024 as a way of fully embracing this reality. We cannot be communists any longer. We must be innovationists. We must advocate for a rationally planned economy by breaking with leftist aesthetics and psychology. We must do as Stalin did during the 5-year plans and unleash a spirit of optimism and construction, celebrating humanity's ability to build. The spiritual power Stalin tapped into to build the Soviet Union is what Khrushchevism, in all of its incarnations, is fighting against. Our movement must embrace the spiritual power, and it must rightly name Khrushchevism as a destructive force. To maintain revolutionary optimism, to contribute to the struggle against imperialism, to move toward creating a government of action that fights for working families, it is necessary to join the Center for Political Innovation and become part of an organization. It is impossible to stay on the revolutionary road in isolation. One must organize and cooperate with others to carry out operations, learn from mistakes, and to construct. Happiness in life can generally be found in 2 ways: through love and connection with another person, and secondly, through construction, building and improving the world around you. A genuine revolutionary organization gives people the ability to experience both of these things and find true happiness, despite whatever hardships and setbacks come along the way. In addition to being a member of a revolutionary organization, there are a number of habits and practices that can be utilized to protect yourself from Khrushchevism and negativity and from slipping into living biologically. Staying engaged. The most important thing is to remain engaged. Stepping into isolation by not communicating or connecting with a revolutionary organization is a sure way to descend into bitterness. Whatever fears, anxiety, grudges, or confusion you may have can only expand when you're on your own. In the age of modern technology, it is very easy to stay connected, but a conscious effort must be made to do it, not when it is easy, but when it is hard. When you feel exhausted, when disagreements stress you out, when insecurities or anxieties are plaguing you, this is the most important time to join the Zoom call, attend the workshop, and go to the rally. This is when you need the movement the most, not when it's easy, when it's difficult. When the forces within you seek to pull you down into isolation, demoralization, and exhaustion, this is when you need to throw yourself into the revolutionary movement the most. The bitterness and demoralization is not your instincts. It's not the negativity of a hostile society. It is the way, the bitterness and demoralization is not your instincts. It is the negativity of a hostile society weighing down on you. You need to fight back. And to do this, you need others. Icons. There's a reason that for thousands of years, the Russian Orthodox Church has created icons of great saints that are displayed by believers. There's a reason the Soviet Union adopted this aesthetic with pictures of Lenin and Stalin on display. There's a reason ancestor worship and other traditions have deep roots in the East. We all have a part of our conscious mind that Sigmund Freud called the superego. It is the voice of your parent, a mentor, an admired authority figure, someone we look up to and strive to make proud. Explaining Freud's concept of the superego, Reuben Osborne wrote, quote, "The child comes to recognize some external authority as having the power to curtail the satisfaction of its instinctive needs. In a myriad of ways, the tiny child is made to feel the essential difference between it and the adult, and the ability of the latter to satisfy it or prevent satisfaction of its needs. The role which the parents or other authorities have played in exacting from the child adjustments to demands of external reality leaves its mark on the child. While the ego is yet weak and unable to control the imperative demands of the id, a portion of the ego becomes identified with the parent and in the form of the superego continues to watch over the id impulses, compelling the ego to repress those it considers impermissible. It is the superego which is responsible for the emotional attachment of people to religious movements wherein God and the church and other authoritative voices represent the Father, which is responsible for the obedience of the forces of authority which exist in society. The superego is irrational in its compulsions, its morality, and is a stern one for its origin in childhood when parental authority demanded unquestioning obedience. Its influence was seen during the Jubilee celebrations, when many people who ordinarily manifest little interest in the doings of royalty were emotionally aroused and proclaimed by flags and revelry their love for the King, Father. It is noteworthy that King's annual addresses on Christmas Day to the empire were perfectly adapted to the emotional relationship between himself and millions of people. He spoke to the peoples of the empire as one family, of which he was their father. And it cannot be denied that for millions of people, their love and protection, which preceded in early childhood the formation of the superego, is active in adult life. The need for love was a determining factor in the child's early environment. The response he makes to the latter economic and social environment is greatly influenced by the way the need for love and protection was answered in childhood days. Most people think their childhood as comparatively happy and carefree time, when the love and protection of their parents sheltered them from the harshness of reality. Others, of course, were treated with resentment by their parents as intruding and imposing extra burdens upon them. Such resentment may have proceeded from economic causes, such as poverty, which made the feeding of an extra mouth a great problem. From these two possible situations in which the child's love needs may be more or less adequately met or more or less discarded, two attitudes may spring. In the first case, the adult, in forming the superego identifications, will tend to regard the authorities on whom he has displaced his emotions and attitudes toward his parents with feelings of trust and love rather than antagonism. In the other case, rebelliousness and hatred will dominate. Underlying that love is latent antagonism, which under circumstances to be discussed later can be aroused to replace the love. To stay on the revolutionary road, you must learn to actively cultivate your own superego. To keep on the right path, you need to find a great revolutionary figure or someone you look up to and erect a large picture of them in your home. You need to imagine yourself talking to them and consulting them about the challenges you face in your daily life. You need to strive to do as this figure would do or would want you to do. When visiting the home of a fellow innovationist, your question should be, where are your icons? There's nothing shameful about having a portrait of a great historical figure or idol on display. It is a necessity in staying on the revolutionary road. Classical music. Our culture is excessively emotional. Explosive feelings of rage, sexual arousal, etc. come at us from every angle. Social media, television, but most especially from music. Music should be emotional. I enjoy plenty of modern rock and hip-hop music. I enjoy plenty of sentimental pieces that pluck my emotional heartstrings. But it must be acknowledged that the level of emotion in our current culture is limiting our ability to think clearly. It is causing us to be overwhelmed and stressed. It is amplifying the Oedipal and libidinal impulses and hindering our ability to listen to other people and make clear-headed decisions. That is why it is a good practice to begin every day with classical music, rather than modern, emotional, and explosive music. Classical music is often mathematical and rooted in rational patterns. It appeals to us in a slightly more intellectual rather than emotional way. It is good to begin and end each day with older music, music composed prior to the massive commercialization of the music industry that came after the Second World War. This sets a foundation for the day that is more structured and clear-headed rather than explosive and impulse-driven. Mantras. Words can give you power. It is important to find passages of revolutionary literature, a few sentences, and memorize them. Memorize them so you can call them up at any time and recite them to bring yourself peace. Find phrases that speak to you as true and repeat them to yourself until they become part of your essence. Perhaps set a goal to say them 100 or 200 times in a day and count them off with check marks or a device. When your mind resists, force yourself to do this long-time meditation practice. Make yourself repeat the words until you can say them without even thinking. Implant the words deep into your soul so they can belong to you and be called up at any time. Consistency. When you commit to do something and fulfill your commitment, this is an expression of your humanness. You are not living biologically, but exercising power by making a decision. I will do this. And then exercising your willpower and making it so. Other people will value and appreciate you more if you can be reliable and a man of your word, no doubt. However, you owe this primarily to yourself. Each time you commit to carrying out a task and do as you planned, your confidence in yourself grows. You feel more powerful. Each time you fail to enact enough willpower to do as you set out to do, your self-esteem and confidence decreases. To develop your potency as a revolutionary and push back against the forces looking to drag you back into a mere biological existence, it is necessary to consistently and constantly make commitments and fulfill them. This shouldn't be limited to activism and organizational activities, but should be extended to everyday life. Challenge yourself to exercise, eat better, be cleaner, or perform specific daily tasks. Learn to see it as a kind of game, a kind of puzzle, learning how to work around your own mind and your own distractions, and each day strengthen your own ability to alter the world around you and exercise personal strength. A small Marxist-Leninist group from Canada recorded a number of songs to express their beliefs. One of their songs, drawing from the works of Lenin and Stalin, was called "The Party is the Most Precious Thing." This is a sentiment one finds in the works of various revolutionary leaders throughout history. The revolutionary organization, the network of people cooperating to oppose imperialism, globalism, and carry out effective operations, is essential. Many young people nowadays adopt ideologies and religions on the internet. For a while, they are a Trotskyist, then they are a Maoist, then a fascist, then a Buddhist, then a Catholic. These young people are in search of an identity. They are trying on these various labels, buying books, listening to podcasts around them. Doing so, they really do not understand any of these perspectives. They are engaging in fandom and consumption, But all of these various Weltanschauungen were created to serve the practical purpose of a collective organization. If you want to understand Christianity, don't listen to podcasts and buy Christian swag. Join a church. If you want to understand Islam, don't just tweet about the Quran. Join a mosque. This applies to politics as well. None of what is written in this book or published by the Center for Political Innovation is produced for mere consumption. We are not an entity of entertainment or a vehicle for intellectual intrigue. We want to build a movement, and we want to recruit you. If you really want to understand the essence of the ideas expressed here and elsewhere, you need to join us. Without this context, you won't really get it. This is a movement we are creating, and the Center for Political Innovation is a vehicle for bringing this movement into being. Most of humanity is asleep, living biologically. Our job is to awaken humanity and make people aware of their inherent ability to engage with the world around them, innovate, and reinvent it. This is not an easy task, but it provides a life of fulfillment, purpose, and deep connection with others. Reflecting on the events of the Russian Revolution, which he witnessed and participated in, Leon Trotsky wrote, "In ordinary times, the state, be it monarchical or democratic, elevates itself above the nation, and history is made by specialists in that line of business, kings, ministers, bureaucrats, parliamentarians, journalists. But at those crucial moments where the old order becomes no longer endurable to the masses, they break over barriers, excluding them from the political arena, sweeping aside their traditional representatives and creating their own interference, the initial groundwork for a new regime. Entirely exceptional conditions, independent of the will of persons or parties, are necessary in order to tear off from discontent the fetters of conservatism and bring the masses into insurrection. The swift changes in mass views and moods in an epoch of revolution thus derive not from the flexibility and mobility of men's minds, but from the opposite, from its deep conservatism. The chronic lag of ideas and relations behind new objective conditions right up to the moment when the latter crashes over people in the form of a catastrophe is what creates, in a period of revolution, that leaping moment of ideas which seem to police the mind, a mere result of activities of demagogues. The masses go into revolution not with a prepared plan of social construction, but a sharp feeling that they cannot endure the old regime. Mao Zedong wrote, "The masses are the real heroes, while we ourselves are often childish and ignorant. And without this understanding, it is impossible to acquire even the most rudimentary knowledge." He also said, "The masses have boundless creative power. They can organize themselves, concentrate on places and branches of work where they can give full play to their energy. They can concentrate on production in breadth and depth and create more and more undertakings of their own being." The coming awakening won't primarily come from us. It will come from the people all around us, rising to the moment and blowing us away with their heroism and bravery. We have the honor and the duty, with our knowledge, awareness, to guide the coming explosion and point the masses who are ready to awaken in the right direction. We have awakened ahead of time, and we can set the stage for much greater awakenings that are the inevitable result of the trajectory of our society. The plan to contain and restrain the human spirit will backfire. An awakening is coming. Imagine a gigantic boulder that is about to roll down a mountainside. We cannot stop this boulder, and we aren't responsible for starting its downward course. We have the ability to nudge and direct this boulder so it falls in the right direction. This is a great privilege, and it makes us quite important in the unfolding course of human events. We cannot expect every person we encounter to join our ranks. We must recall the words of Jesus Christ when explaining that few people would be able to really take his message to heart. "Enter ye in the strait gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction. And many there be which go thereat, because the strait is the gate, and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and there are few that find it." He went on to tell his followers that it wasn't simply enough to believe in his message, but that they were obligated to join the movement and carry out his important work. And Jesus said unto his disciples, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. In isolation, whatever knowledge we may have, we have no hope of nudging the boulder. The organization is the most precious thing, and it is the most essential thing. It enables us to utilize our understanding of the ways of history and intervene. The enemy has inculcated in us a constant phobia, a constant tendency to think all is a fraud, a scam, a constant pressure to stand up and shout, it's a cookbook, and retreat into isolation. In order to stay on the revolutionary road, you must make a conscious decision to reject Khrushchevism. You must be willing to love, serve, connect, not simply vent, rebel, and expose. That's the end. That's the book. So now I can edit it and make a full audio book. And here we are, 3 hours in, doing the roll call. And we'll see if we got any Rumble rants. And then I'll answer them. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Joe in Durham. Lawrence Johnson in Chicago. Phil in Miami, Florida. Nikita Khrushchev in Seneca, South Carolina. Ryan in Kansas City. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. St. David's, Bermuda. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Alex in Brazil. St. David's, Bermuda. Singapore. Luca. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Phil, hi. Brooklyn in the house. When are you going to print a large print version of your books? That's interesting. I've never considered that. Interesting. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? Dan in LA. Come to the workshop on Saturday. Yes, register down below. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome. Come to the workshop in LA. It's going to be cool. I'm headed to LA on Thursday. It's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? Connor from Vancouver just came into the stream. Gabby in Chicago. Welcome. Anybody else? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else? Anybody else? John in Maspeth, Queens. Welcome, John. Good to have you with us. Colin in Greensboro. Welcome, Colin. Good to have you with us. Good to have you with us. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else? Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? Anybody? Anybody else? Names and locations. All right. Well, I don't see any super chats, and we have actually gone on. I don't see any Rumble rants or Cash Apps that have come in, and we have actually gone for well over 3 hours. So I might just end it here. But I do want to remind you all about our convention coming up in Chicago. It is going to be the biggest thing we've ever done. So I'm going to put that video on. If anyone, last call, I've still got a voice, and you can send questions via Rumble Rant, or you can cash at me at CalebMoppin22 if you got any questions. Last call for any questions. But here's the video about our upcoming convention. Friends, how you doing today? I'm letting you know, the Center for Political Innovation, we are about to do, on July 12th, the biggest event that we have ever done. It will be our national gathering in Chicago on July 12th. And it's going to be really, really special. We are talking with a number of important anti-imperialist voices, a lot of different communities. There's going to be musical performances, dance performances, there's going to be great speeches, and it's going to be a whole day gathering dedicated to anti-imperialism. I am committed, and CPI has always been committed to building an in real life network of people. And we carry out real operations. We were at the inauguration of Trump with our Trump and Kim banner saying only peace can make America great again. We were on the streets of Chicago at the Democratic National Convention with a book exposing what Kamala Harris and who she really is and what she's really about, and it was really, really important. We have 1,000 copies of our book about the Houthis that are being distributed with the poster of the convention on the back to people who would never go looking for this. We are putting door hanger flyers on doors of people, again, that would never go looking for this. We're not performing and trying to make ourselves feel good. We're actually trying to build a network of people that can be anti-imperialists in America. And it's not easy to do. It's very difficult in these times to build a real in-life organization. People have their issues. We live in a very strange time, but we have to do it. And we are committed to continuing this project. This video is basically me telling you we need your support. In order to pull off our convention that includes our 7-day program for our members around the country to come to Chicago, includes our huge convention on July 12th, where we're gonna fill up the Midwest Convention Center, in order to have an effective national planning meeting and gathering in Chicago the day after on July 13th. In order to do what we need to do, we need to fill up that auditorium and we need money. And there's really no way around that. We need you to donate to the Center for Political Innovation. We have set up a GoFundMe, and a lot of people have already contributed. We already raised a couple $1,000, but it's not enough. In order to really pull off our July activities and really have a win for anti-imperialism, we need your support. We need you to go to the GoFundMe right now and donate $5 or $20. We need you to go to the donate button on the CPI website and send us $100 or $50, whatever you can do. If we're gonna do what we need to do in July and build the organization and have the mega anti-imperialist rally that needs to happen on July 12th and solidify the network that we're building to continue to carry out the great operations that we do, we need you to help us out. Every cent that we raise goes into building this group. I'm lucky I have a paycheck with everything that's going on. I'm surviving, and I have consistently put a huge amount of the money that I have, my own resources, my own funds, into CPI because I believe in it, because it needs to happen, because this organization is necessary. I'm looking at what I've got and my own resources and my own bills and all of that, and I'm looking at what's already been paid for, and it's not enough. I mean, it's just not enough. I can't just pay for everything myself. We have membership dues and other things, but we need a special gift. We need a special gift to make July happen. We need you to give us a special contribution so that we can make sure the July events go smoothly, that the housing for the people coming in out of town is covered, that the speakers that are being flown in, their airfare is properly covered. We need you to make a special one-time gift to make this July gathering, this anti-imperialist summit that we are organizing. We need you to help us make it happen and help us make it a success. Small gift, big gift, whatever you can do. We need you to help us with it. But you know what? I'll just say this. If it's a matter of send us a gift or come, we'd rather you come. We'd rather you be there. It's much more important that you be there on July 12th. If you can't afford to give us a gift, but you can afford to come to town If there's one event that you come to this year, make it July 12th. CPI, Center for Political Innovation, we're doing something that nobody else is doing, and we're doing it right. We're not doing it in a way that we're trying to win the internet. We're not doing it in a way that we're trying to make ourselves feel special or act like we're cool. We're building what needs to be built. We are building the real connections. And if you can understand why what we're doing is so important, if you can understand why anti-imperialism is the future, but we have to break out of the narrow niche circles and internet culture and get to the masses of people with real outreach. If you can understand that, please give us a gift. We're trying to build an actual movement to win new people to anti-imperialism and continue to carry out operations to change the conversation in America so that we have a country where there's a mass movement demanding justice for working families and an end to these wars, that we're saying no to World War III, we're saying no to the emerging low-wage police state. That's what we urgently need. So if you can help us in any way, send us a gift. If you can be there on July 12th, be there. This is the biggest endeavor CPI has ever done, and it's going to lead to even bigger things. We don't back down. We don't go away. If we were going to back down, we would have done it a long time ago. And if we were one of their plants or one of these fake anti-imperialists, they would be making it a lot easier for us. We have been facing a lot of challenges, but we continue to achieve great victories. So we need your support. Please send us a contribution. Please be there on July 12th at the Midwest Convention Center in the Chicago area. It's right near the O'Hare Airport. It's going to be awesome. We need you there. Thank you. Yep, that's us. So yeah, if you feel like dropping us a contribution, for the Chicago activities, I'm already paying for people's plane tickets and other things, and or the Airbnb is reserved, and there's a lot happening all of a sudden. So that's okay. We're excited and we've got a lot on our plate, but we're ready to do it. So yeah, if you can drop us $5, $10, $20, that would be awesome. I'm going to edit the audio book. It'll probably premiere on Wednesday morning. I'll premiere the audio book of Khrushchevism. I'm really glad that we finished the book tonight because I've wanted to get the audio book out there. People listen to these audiobooks, so we'll do that. And yeah, thanks everybody. I'm glad you're here. And come to Chicago. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be absolutely tremendous. So yeah, you don't want to miss it. And I'll be in LA this weekend. So yeah, if you want to come if you're in LA, right, we're kind of finalizing things for LA, but if you're in California, I am going to be in Los Angeles area this weekend. We're having a great workshop. Dan is going to come on this stream on Tuesday to talk about the workshop. So it's going to be awesome. So thanks everybody. And yeah, we'll put on the closing music here. And yeah, here we go. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.